Uh, hello. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Political Pigpen. As always, I am your host, the Politicrats. Tonight, we are going to be talking about a number of things, mostly pertaining to suffrage, the franchise, yada yada yada, all that fun stuff. Because we all know what's kind of going down in Georgia right now. It's I guess the Republicans have gone down to Georgia. And they're looking for a soul to steal, something like that. But yeah, no. So in the context of that, we're just going to be talking about voting rights in general. I don't want to go into too much detail. I don't want to start with some big crappy monologue or anything. But so we're going to be splitting the stream into two parts. The first third is going to be talking about what's going on in Georgia right now, just talking about voter fraud, voter suppression in general, just that sort of dichotomy, and just the whole, because everyone's talking about voter fraud and voter suppression these days, depending on what side of the aisle that you're on. And then we're going to take a brief intermission. And then the last 2/3, we're going to be debating more or less the extent to which suffrage and the franchise should extend in society. Whether we should have more or less a pure democracy, as I think LSPs probably sort of leans towards that. I know that's I'm kind of being I'm kind of simplifying it, but either way, we kind of all have our own conceptions of what we each individually feel the voting should be organized in a democratic society. So we're going to be going on and talking about that. So that's going to be a little more formal. But we're going to just start by talking about what's going on in Georgia. But first, we're going to need to go around, as always, and start with introductions. Beginning with Coronis. How are you doing this evening, Coronis?
I'm doing well, thank you. How's my microphone, by the way?
No, your microphone's fine. I hear you.
Okay,
but wait, so I know this isn't your first time on one of my streams, because I know you were on the
yeah, but it's been a few months. It's been
that stream which shall not be named a few months ago. But I don't know if you've ever been on a Pigpen before.
Yeah, I haven't. So I think I should introduce myself.
Yeah, go ahead.
So hello, I am CoronisTheGreat. I am typically left-wing on social issues like the embrace of human sexuality, rehabilitative justice, ending the war on drugs, but right-wing on fiscal and foreign policy issues. I want to abolish workers' protections and most means-tested welfare programs in favor of a UBI, EITC expansion, and other cash transfer programs, and I'm an imperialist. So what are my views on voting? The fact that 75 million souls, 45% of the 2020 turnout, voted for Donald Trump, a wannabe Caesarist who mismanaged a global pandemic because their shitty jobs were shipped overseas or done by immigrants or machinery, that the 2020 election almost became Bernie Sanders versus Donald Trump.
That would have been funny. No, I just said that would have been funny, just in a very sad way.
But basically, Bernie Sanders is someone who unironically praised Castro, Chavez, and the Sandinistas, and he almost beat Joe Biden. And to echo counterpoints, a good friend of mine, once baby boomers die, Nick Fuentes and Charlie Kirk can embody the right, while Vosh and Hassan Piker embody the left. These facts have contributed to my loss in faith in universal suffrage to protect the republic against the mobs of reckless, envious ignoramuses. Those who wish to vote must pass the test in American history, American civics, economics, and media literacy to vote. That is my position.
So we'll get onto that a little bit later in part two. I just think we should be just doing, for now at least, general introductions. But so next up, LSP has returned with us this evening. I think this is your third episode. The first one you did, I know, was another one about democracy, and that was a lot of fun. I think we all remember how that went.
Was it the one? I want to say it was the one with the. I don't want to call him alt-right, but like borderline alt-right guy who thought democracy wouldn't survive in France because of Muslim immigration.
Well, it wasn't. It was a little more nuanced than that, and he's definitely not alt-right, but yeah, more or less. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'm probably the most extreme person in terms of like advocacy for democracy. You're probably going to find in here, except for I guess democracy in the workplace, which I can take it or leave it. I don't really care. Yeah, that's me.
Well, good to have you back, LSP.
Yeah, thank you.
Next, based waifu. How are you doing? Are you feeling? Are you feeling based tonight?
I'm well glad I could finally join one of your streams for once. I'm sorry I've been really busy. You I know you just keep inviting me to streams, and I'm just like, oh gosh, I have so much work to do because I'm in the middle of doing my master's degree. So I'm sorry I haven't been able to attend any streams.
No, it's fine. It's all good. But yeah, it's good. Good to have you here this time at least. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself? Talk about what you do, if you do anything besides a master's degree.
I'm currently studying for my master's in public policy and administration. I do a lot of D&D. I'm planning on hosting one of my first campaign as a DM soon, hopefully. So that's fun. But it's on politics. I'm very centrist. I'm known to be. I play a lot of devil's advocate. I always make sure I know like the other point of view before I. And I'm normally known to be pretty balanced. And mostly, I'm very socially liberal. And like pretty. But when it comes to like. I'm sorry, I didn't prepare a speech or anything. So
no, it's fine. Didn't you used to be a boomer? Didn't you used to be a boomer con, from what I understand?
What?
Didn't you used to be a boomer con?
Oh yeah, when I was a freshman in college, I used to be a cringe conservative. I used to work for Turning Point USA, and before that, I was a full blown socialist. So I've been on a lot of different extremes, and now I am very centrist. So. That's kind of how I'm able to understand the crazies and why they think the way they do.
Well, good to finally have you on.
Thank you.
Next, we have Pest the Titan. Is this your first time on one of my streams? I mean, I feel like I've had you on before, but I can't place it.
This is my first time on one of your streams, so. Yeah,
I think we've been on streams together before, but I think we've probably been on like Ray Marasami's or something at some point. Or no, Kevin. I think we were both on Castley's stream.
Yeah, I do believe so.
Hosts. Yeah. All right. Want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Okay. Well, broadly speaking, I would consider myself to be a neoconservative, center-right to right-wing, with a heavy focus on philosophy and geopolitics. My views would be described mainly, to articulate that opinion, would be more of a compromise between idealism and realism. Personally, I am an idealist when I can be, but realizing the nature of international relations, you must be a realist when you can. And that applies not just to foreign policy, but also to domestic policy. And in these discussions, I hope to sort of challenge liberal democracy, but at the same time defend it. So I'm glad to be on. So thank you.
What's your opinion on German idealism?
Based.
Okay. On that note, thank you for coming on, Pest. It's good to have you on. And finally, we have our old pal, the man, the myth, the legend himself, McCarthyist, neoliberal imperialist. I think is this your second time on? I think you were on the foreign policy debate back in November.
Yeah, I was. Hello. I'm a neoliberal imperialist, as always. And I just believe in the virtue of technocracy and the ability of people that are academically credentialed to make decisions on behalf of the people that need the proper guidance. That is my take. Yeah.
All right. Well, welcome all of you. I think this is going to be an interesting stream. I feel like we're either all going to be very civil or we're all going to be yelling at each other at some point. I will try to keep it as orderly as possible. I have a good feeling about it. But either way, first order of business, Georgia. So I'm honestly, and I feel like this is it every time whenever we're talking about an issue, because I've kind of been ignoring. I know I shouldn't be ignoring politics, especially because I have a political stream, but I've been trying to distance myself a bit from it these days. So I really only know the basics of a lot of these things going on. So like I said, I know the basics of what's going on in Georgia, but I feel like somebody else might be able to describe it better than me in a more detailed way. Anybody here want to have a go at that and try to present it in like at least the least biased way possible?
Well, what I find interesting about the Georgia law is that 34 states beforehand had voter ID laws, but it was Georgia in particular that received the most negative attention. Like corporations are boycotting Georgia over these laws.
No. I mean background on what's going on. Like,
oh, I apologize. I mean, my knowledge of this is not unbiased. So maybe Liberal Sanity Project, who knows a lot more about this than I do. I only know like some of the bare bones elements of this, like the consequences of this policy. Maybe LSP can enlighten us
on the Georgia law. One of the things I know is it reduces the number. It restricts same-day registration. It reduces the number of drop boxes in the 3 most Democratic counties. And the popular one, it forbids the distribution of water and food resources to people who might be waiting on polls and stuff like that. There's a lot of pretty foobar stupid stuff in that, I think.
Yeah. Now, I personally think it's a result of Georgia surprisingly turning blue. I think Republicans reacted to that. They saw the voter turnout in 2020, and they essentially want to reduce that voter turnout in hopes they get what they consider better results.
I pretty much agree with that.
Yeah, I can agree with that because I mean, at this point, I've determined that politics is at this point it's not about principle or ideology, but it's about zoological power struggles. And you see, whenever a side is starting to kind of gain the upper hand, the other side, in order to buckle down, will do something not based on principle at all, but something more or less just they will react in such a way that will allow for them to sort of retain their power, or they'll do it to expand power. Like, for instance, like the Republicans right now with stricter voting laws. And then you see the same exact thing with like certain people, like elements in the Democratic Party who call for abolishing the Electoral College. That's another example for the Democrats. However, so these are just two examples of at least how I see it. They don't want to do this based on principle. They want to do it because their ideologies aren't conservatism or liberalism or progressivism. It's just they're all winists. They all believe in winism.
Well, it can be based on principle too. I think Republicans are principally opposed, or conservatives are principally opposed to democracy in concept. They might just hide that principle. I mean, you could argue maybe they're principally against democracy because they constantly lose. Like every time there's an actual fair.
No, actually, vote. I would go deeper than that. So basically, what I would say is
hold on, Coronis. I just want to say, but you also need to take a look at the Electoral College issue. It's really all just a matter of sore losers in elections, because whenever a Republican president wins the Electoral College but loses the popular vote, the Democrats will call to abolish the Electoral College. Mm-hmm. And then whenever the Democrats lose the popular vote but win the Electoral College, then the pendulum will shift.
Wait, how has that ever happened?
I think this happened back in the 70s.
No, the last time this happened was when there was an ideology switch and the Democratic Party was the Conservative Party. This happened in like the late 19th century. This only happened like 5 times in U.S. history, and only happened once that it's benefited Democrats.
Either way, though, okay. So you said this was back when the Democratic Party was the Conservative Party. I think that is a little too simplifying it a bit there, because we need to remember that the whole left-right divide, as we know it now, just the strict left-right divide in terms of divvying up the parties, wasn't really a thing until about the 70s or 80s, because you had
that's not true at all.
Yes, you had left wings and right wings on both, like in both parties. You had a right wing of the Democratic Party, left wing of the Democratic Party.
Do you think the Republican Party was the conservative party in the mid late 19th century?
You had some quote unquote conservative elements, but the major elements of it at the time would be, at least in by today's standards, would be considered left wing. But you still did have a strong pro business, not quite laissez-faire, but because you had like the McKinley types, more or less.
Right, but I can I add something very quickly?
Who were closer to the Bourbon Democrats than they were to.
I don't know that anybody would deny that there was a ideology shift with both parties. And
I'm talking about
Democratic
like strict
Party
partisanship, like in terms of like Republican equals 100% right wing, Democrat equals 100% left wing.
They changed on a matter of fiscal
you still had
following the New Deal.
You still had some Southern Democrats all the way up until.
Like, yeah, but can I please interject something very quickly?
Yes, go
I
ahead.
apologize. All I was going to say is that to respond to what LSP said, you can actually undermining another party doesn't necessarily just have to be like a zoological struggle for power, to use your phraseology. It could be that Republicans have an ideal of what American society should look like. And when Democrats are winning elections left and right...
Oh, shit. I'll be right back, actually. I'm really sorry. I'll be right back.
All right. But they feel that their ideological vision has been threatened by the prevalence of the Democratic Party. So they're undermining them, not just for realpolitik reasons, but because they feel their country's future is at stake. So it could be based on principles as well. But I would go deeper than that, because he's basically saying Republicans evil. I mean, I would consider them a corrupt party, but I think there's philosophical reasons for why. I mean, this is nothing new. I mean, if you know anything about British history, the Whigs and the Tories will like pit different demographics against each other, even religious groups against each other, in the name of achieving their ideal system.
Yeah, no, I feel like that's basically, in some ways, what the Republicans and the Democrats are kind of doing right now, purposefully trying to pit these different groups against each other, and then they just want to take the money and run. Like, I mean, the biggest lie that the American people were ever told was that we have two parties. When in reality, it's really just you have like dissident factions in those individual parties, but it's basically become the welfare, warfare, Wall Street party at that point. And you have like minor policy differences, but they're all within that same Overton window of like corporatism. And I don't mean to sound like some kind of like a populist or anything by saying this, because I'm certainly not a populist, but at this point, that's basically what is like. What is the difference between, at this point, Lindsey Graham or better yet, Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer? They probably abortion and abortion and maybe gays.
Well, voting rights, you don't think that's a pretty big difference?
Well, yeah, I know that one too, but no, I'm just being like, you know what I mean? In terms of their MOs might be a little different.
To be fair,
they basically subscribe to the same overarching ideology, because it's not about democracy even for either of them.
But to be fair, don't Democrats gerrymander as well? Don't they try to suppress Republicans?
Oh, yes, they do. Yes, they do.
I
mean, I'm from a place where one of the most infamous gerrymandering incidents is, and it's all because of the Democrats.
Can we let Pest talk next?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to respond to like the discussion between Politicrat and LSP earlier, but it's kind of like I guess the window for that has passed. I just will say very briefly that for most of American history, the two parties were more geographical and social clubs rather than ideological elements. So, for instance, certain demographics would be represented in this party or that party, but these demographics would have different political views. So you'll have like conservative Republicans and liberal Republicans and conservative Democrats and liberal Democrats, which are the Bourbons. It was more based on geography, with Democrats controlling the South and the West and Republicans the Northeast. But it was not as ideologically divided as it was today. But just wanted to clarify that point.
Well, yeah, like for example, Southern Democrats before the 1960s were the party of the racists. They were the ones who were pro-segregation, but the Democrats in the North were the ones who generally favored expanding racial equality, which is why the FDR administration was a hell of a mess on racial issues, because he tried to maintain like a sort of a balance of power between the various factions of the Democratic Party. Which is why his track record on race relations was not very good, because he was trying to appeal to.
He literally put Japanese people in concentration camps. I would say that what you're saying is an understatement about his policies on race not being that good. I think it's a little worse than that.
Yeah, well, they did that to Italians and Germans as well. I mean, it's still not excusable, but. I mean, it's in the time of, well, that's more of like in a time of war, but yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, I was just doing a project on where I was reading about like Italian Americans throughout the 20s through 40s, and that's just something they did to all three of those nationalities.
I mean, I'd understand why they might do. I can at least comprehend why they might do that for like, I don't know, like new green card holders who just arrived or whatever. But to do that to your own citizens, I mean, I've always thought that was really fucked up.
I mean, I understand maybe why they took a bit of a harsher stance on the Japanese, since the Japanese were the ones that kind of brought the U.S. into the war. They're the ones that actually bombed Pearl Harbor. I mean, that doesn't excuse anything, but I mean, considering like how certain things were normal back in the day, like considering what certain things were, I mean, there's a lot of like a lack of ethics and everything back in the day.
Well, yeah, but my point, was that basically FDR, the reason for his racist politics was primarily because he was trying to cater to the Southern Democrats.
That would make a lot of sense.
By the way, let's move back to
Georgia. Yeah, I wanted to add something. So
Georgia, yeah.
One reason the voter law is so controversial is because it's clear that their intention is to reduce the voter turnout. So, for example, Republicans banned giving water and food to those waiting in voting lines.
Yeah, that's arbitrary. Like, I can't see. Like, there are some things that you could at least argue for, like the voter ID laws. For instance, I'm personally. Yeah. In favor of voter ID laws. It just sounds like common sense to me. But something like banning giving water or food to people who are standing in line to vote, there's no precedent. There's no what else would they be trying to do if not to literally starve the people out of line?
Yeah, basically that's it. Because majority blue districts, black, have less polling stations, so lines are going to be longer. So by not giving them food and water, you're creating an incentive for them to not stick around, because when they get thirsty or hungry, they're going to walk away. Now, Republicans, some Republicans initially tried to excuse this as saying that some people in like campaigns would give food and water as like a form of bribery. Like they'll basically, like a person of the Joe Biden campaign will give food to someone and say thank you. It's like that was like it's like basically de facto bribery, because you're basically saying, hey, vote for my candidate and you get free stuff.
I mean, the thing is, like, I work for my county's Office of Elections, and they every time when there's like an election day, I'll go and I'll work the polls, work the machines, do all that stuff. And you always have the campaigners that are waiting outside the precinct. Usually it's like a school. But yeah, so they're like, they have to stay like a certain distance away from the entrance to the precinct themselves. But there's like usually a Democratic tent and a Republican tent set up, and they have like food under there, they have water, and they just give it. out to people for free. Like, it doesn't matter who they give it out to. And I mean, both sides, like, they'll chat with each other, not much animosity. I mean, it like, from my observation, at least where I am. Then again, I do live in a pretty moderate, politically moderate place as it relates to both Republicans and
do you
Democrats.
think there's
no? But they don't seem to have an agenda for doing it. I mean, it just seems like they're just coming out to, I mean, first of all, promote their candidates, and then second of all, just like have food and drinks that people can come and take.
Can I say? Okay, I don't know what the laws are in Georgia, but where I live, there's I mean, I voted in 2 states. One it was in like 2016.
You voted twice, Donald Trump.
No,
So we could vote twice.
Like one in the first 2016, and one in like in this year, and those are 2 different states. Well, one state I voted in, people were allowed to, as long as they were, I guess they weren't the major presidential candidates. Like, local candidates were allowed to like promote their candidate while you were waiting in line. And that's a big no-no. In the other state I was in, it was like there's no passing out of literature, no advertising another candidate of any kind while people were waiting in line. So for a while I was wondering if that's just, I wonder which states have that law. If it's because I understand like being like, okay, no, you can't pass out ballots telling people to vote for certain people while they're waiting in line to vote. I mean, I would totally get that, but does the law say that you can't like sell water, or just can't give it out for free?
You can't hand it out for free.
Okay,
because again, their justification was, and it's a bunch of bullshit. It's clear what they're trying to do. Their justification is, what the fuck, Politicrat?
Does it say like, at all, or does it say or possibly could like the facilities that are people are voting hand that out? Like, since those are clearly like neutral parties.
Yeah. To my knowledge, it's basically no free food or water. I think they do specify that you can only get food and water at a certain distance, but it's like so far away from the entrance. That's I don't know the exact elements of it, but
well, as Robert Heinlein once said, there's no such thing as a free lunch.
Yeah.
MMI, what's your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on Republican efforts to suppress the vote in Georgia?
Quite honestly, I don't really have much of an opinion.
All right, fair enough.
I just think it's about the zoological power struggle.
Yeah,
that's basically
Georgia,
what it
however,
is. Similar to, and I'm not even necessarily against DC statehood, but it's similar to the Democrats wanting to grant DC statehood.
I just wanted to say what I wanted to say at the start of this segment was basically, as we said before, like this has brought like a debate over voter ID laws in general. But here's the thing: 34 states, over half the bloody country, had voter ID laws before Georgia passed these updates, and nobody really cared beforehand except the ACLU. But
ACLU
now
used to be for voter ID laws.
I care pretty intensely.
Yeah,
with Georgia though. Okay, I'll let LSP and God to Your Wife go next. But here's the thing: what makes the Georgia law so unique compared to the other 34 states that corporations are now boycotting Georgia, like Coca-Cola, MLB, I believe an airline even are all boycotting Georgia.
I think that's virtue. Honestly, the only thing I can think of is, and I'm not saying this in sort of a way to, because I'm speaking neutrally here when I say this, because again, I think that some of the shenanigans that the Republicans are pulling in Georgia it's more than questionable. But either way, the only thing I can conclude as it relates to the corporations is virtue signaling.
Yeah, which MMI knows a lot about. MMI.
Why can it never be that you have money and you can actually have a valid political opinion on something? I don't understand this.
I mean, virtue? I'd say virtue signaling is still it's not a bad political tactic depending upon like that.
Okay, can I ask you a question, Politicrat? When George Soros funded anti-communist movements in Eastern Europe and he continues.
You mean how he
fund-
funds the socialists to try to undermine the fabric of the United States?
Oh, fuck off!
No, I'm
Fuck off,
kidding. I'm
Sargon.
kidding.
Fuck off, Sargon. But anyway, no. When George Soros funds anti-communist movements in Eastern Europe, when he funds civil rights movements all across the globe, do you think he's just virtue signaling as a billionaire, or do you think he actually believes in civil rights and human flourishing? Do you think
I am inclined to believe that Soros does it. And so honestly, I don't dislike George Soros. Like and this is people think basically I've always had this joke where I get both Soros checks and Koch checks, because you even have people like the Koch brothers who are like or it's just one now, who are like they basically are to the left what George Soros is to the right. It's just the billionaire boogeyman trying to destroy everything and undermine it.
Where do you divide
but
the
either
line?
way, like, I mean, it's all about. I do sincerely believe that many of these people, like the billionaires, even, because I mean we live in an age where basically it's cool to hate on billionaires, but they are people too, and legitimately, we all care about causes. They care about causes. They just have more money, so they can donate money to causes. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that's virtue signaling.
Where do you draw the line between virtue signaling and genuine philanthropy?
I mean, I think it depends on maybe the posturing, number one, and then number two, how much you actually invest into it. Because, like, for instance, remember Andrew Cuomo, for instance, he created something called like the Women's Party or something. I don't know, something like that. But just to kind of, and it basically all they did was talk about like, oh yeah, we need to support like, I don't know, like not single mothers, like family. I don't know what it was, but it was something having to do with women's interests. But then the thing is, they never had a woman nominated, and it was just sort of like a sleazy super PAC for Andrew Cuomo.
So shit like this is like supremely frustrating to me. You can't know what's in a person's head, and when you list like these criteria, which says this is virtue signaling unless you're devoting this amount of, you're investing this much into it, right?
No, I'm just speculating. I'm not giving a definitive, because
it's a baseless speculation. Like Home Depot stands to lose a lot of money by boycotting. So does Coca-Cola. Like, these companies are taking a principled stance, and they're going to lose money
financial against their own financial. Well, I mean, is it in their
Georgia
self-interest though?
Yeah, a lot of customers in Georgia. I would say, yeah, of course.
Can I ask really quickly? Did we ask where everyone stands on voter ID laws?
No,
flatly opposed.
I am for voter ID laws, but I think it should be easy for people to get a voter ID.
Oh, and I mentioned I would agree on principle, but here's the thing: it also needs to be that, like, for example, Farlato mentioned this, and he might be joining later. But Farlato mentioned this one situation where, like, Republican legislators were caught, like, looking at what sort of voter IDs black voters use, and then they basically tried to outlaw all those forms of voter IDs to suppress the black vote. Like, stuff like that is asinine. There should be a federal standard that the average person has easy access to, and there shouldn't be gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is a huge reason why voter ID laws do not work, in my opinion.
Yeah, whenever there's a gerrymandering related referendum in my district, I always vote against the gerrymandering.
I think that as long as you have any kind of ID, I think, like, if it's a driver's license or just something that identify that you're the person who is voting, I mean, everyone has an ID, whether it's for like driving and
No, everyone does not.
I don't. I just tried to renew mine today, and I failed the test. I'm not going to get into that. But.
Or even if it's an expire, as long as it just shows who you are, I think.
Something like 12% of registered voters lack a photo ID, according to the Brennan Center.
Really?
Especially in cities.
Because it's not uncommon for people to not drive. It's not uncommon for people to not need a photo ID.
I rarely drive. I don't drive.
To, like, get into certain areas, or like to apply for certain jobs.
When's the last time you presented a driver's license at a job? Like, the last time I had to do it was when it was a job I had to drive in. Not everyone has a car. Not everyone has a driver's license. You can still apply and get jobs without a driver's license.
Which is why I think that voter ID laws should be a thing. However, we need to remember that we need to make sure that it's not just driver's license. Like, I think you should also, because for instance, the local departments of elections, you can go to the Department of Elections, and within 5 minutes, you can make just a voting ID. That's literally all it is. It's just for presenting to the precinct when you go and you vote. It has your name on it. It's just for voting purposes. You go,
I would
fill it out,
advocate
they mail it
for
to you.
a national ID.
Okay, but-
Basically, the moment you turn 18, you will get an ID in the mail that you can use in elections. I would advocate for a national ID.
But wait, hang on. If 12% of the population doesn't have an ID, then how do they?
11.
I mean, 11. Then how does that population just not purchase any alcohol or anything? Or
Yeah, not everyone drinks.
Or they do, or
Okay,
they do what I
everyone-
did when I was in
people who
college.
don't
People
drive-
would beg us.
For fuck's
Yeah, I
sake,
mean,
I'm never going to get an answer in. Okay, the fundamental issue y'all are missing is there's no real impetus to justify a voter ID. The instances of voter fraud are statistically negligent, such that they've never had an impact on elections, and most of the types of voter fraud that happens wouldn't be prevented by a photo ID because it's mostly mail-in fraud. It's mostly absentee ballot fraud. Like, that's the very specific kind of fraud that generally happens.
Voter fraud does exist, but not in the way that like these boomer cons talk about.
It's statistically negligent.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the reason why it took Nevada so damn long to count all their votes was because of the anti-voter fraud system that they had. Like, it was like checking signatures and making sure the signatures matched up, which is, I think, is dumb because there's a lot of different ways you sign your signature. There's the way where you just do the squiggles, and then there's just one where you actually really try hard to make it look legible. So it's like, how are you supposed to match squiggles to squiggles? It just doesn't make any sense.
But the one thing, voter ID laws, again, I just mean in the basic sense, not in the way that the Republicans want voter ID laws, because, I mean, like I said, I just think you should be able to just prove that you are who you
Well,
say
why don't you? Why isn't it proven by the existence of voter registration?
Let LSP talk.
No, let me finish what I was saying real quick. I think it's just common sense that you should prove who you are. You just show a picture of who you are, or not even that. At least like have something to verify your address or something. Because what if I just walked into?
What if you're homeless?
Well, what if I just walked in to your precinct, LSP, and I said, "Hi, my name is Liberal Sanity Project. I live here, and then I go vote in your name, and then you show up, and then you're like, they tell you that you already voted. Like, I mean, I think you need.
If this were a thing that actually happened, I might be on your side, but this just doesn't happen.
It did. I thought something like that happened recently in New York, like about a year ago.
I mean,
in a
both
primary?
parties can do that, where people can just vote. I mean, if that's the case, and people from both parties can do that. So
I don't know. This sounds
but
like
that
something
shouldn't
that
happen
happened,
at all. Even if it's
that
something that happened.
That sounds like something that would have happened in the 19th century, but it doesn't happen today. Because in the 19th century, you had this thing called cooping, where they would take a person and they will make them wear like 10 different disguises, so they'll vote like 10 different times. That happened before, but we have measures against that now. What you're proposing just doesn't happen today. Would have happened like in the 1800s, but not anymore. I don't think that.
But it can still happen. That's the thing.
But we have measures against it.
We shouldn't just assume that.
Political. Why doesn't cooping happen anymore? Why doesn't cooping happen anymore?
What do you mean, cooping?
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
cooping, that's
I don't know.
I said cooping. I said cooping. Cooping, which is basically a form of voter fraud where you have a person wear 10 different disguises, basically.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
Some believe Edgar Allan Poe died as a result of cooping.
I thought he died of alcoholism.
I mean,
obviously
people debate all the time, but that's one reason that he could have died. Because remember, a reward for cooping was alcohol. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but that doesn't mean.
But why doesn't it happen anymore? Why doesn't cooping happen anymore? Why doesn't cooping happen anymore?
Why doesn't cooping happen anymore? What's your explanation for that?
Because I think we have measures in place now to prevent that sort of fraud.
Such as?
Damn it, you put me on the fucking spot. I was wanting you to answer that because I was trying to use your argument against you. God damn it. I don't know, LSP, you explain. Why doesn't cooping happen anymore?
Probably because voter fraud's very hard to commit today.
But why is it very hard to commit today?
Probably because there's multiple instances of checks. You have to know which precinct the person's, like, you register in specific precincts. You can't just show up like in another town and vote. Or if you do, you have to like justify it. You have to register for your location. There's all sorts of ways that voting is already double checked that are arguably discriminatory against like the poor and the homeless that still serve as a good check. Why doesn't it happen? I don't know. Maybe we just don't commit fraud anymore. But the impetus isn't there for ID. Like,
yeah, I guess that's a fair point. That was where I was trying to get at.
And further, you already prove who you are when you register to vote. Nobody's advocating against registration, but you do need a social to register, and it is checked against the Secretary of State's office, which is oversees like voter registration. So I don't understand what photo IDs is supposed to do that the registration process already doesn't.
But what about just like a regular basic, like, remember I was talking about just basic voter IDs, like IDs specifically meant for voting that you can get at your precinct, like specifically just for voting. Those are not hard to get.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it is.
We should just make those easier to access. But I mean, it just seems like common sense to me that you should have to prove.
It is infinitely difficult to get if you have problems with your mobility. It is infinitely difficult.
Let's make it easier for them to get. Well, let's do that. I mean,
how about we don't require it at all? There's no fraud. Why don't we just not require it at all? Like
because
the solution to solve a problem.
In that case, then what is to stop a bunch of Republicans going and claiming that they are Democrats that they know the names of? They somehow managed to gather the names of all of these Democrats, and then they show up first thing on election day, or even like they show up first thing on when the polls open. And they go and they say they're these people, they have the addresses, they have all this, and then they end up voting for the Republican in the name of these people who are Democrats. They've gathered all this information. They Watergated some shit. I don't know. That's not important. But hypothetically, what is to stop them from doing that? Because that could benefit them in the end.
What's to stop them from committing fraud? Is that your question?
Yeah. What's to stop the Republicans then from committing fraud and voting for Republican candidates in the name of Democrats or under certain Democrats' names? I just don't see a reason why there shouldn't be voter ID.
How would a photo ID stop? Because most fraud is not going to be committed that way because it's too easy to track down through in-person voting.
But are there any real consequences?
But getting rid of voter ID laws,
people went to jail for years. Yeah,
getting rid of voter ID laws is going to make it easier to do that. That's what I am saying.
Okay, I'm not.
Can I ask a question?
Because it just doesn't happen. Like it doesn't
happen now because we have voter IDs.
I'm sorry, we had voter IDs before this didn't happen. When did this happen? This very hyper-specific scenario you're describing, it doesn't happen even when we do have voter IDs.
No. I don't think you get what I'm saying. You're saying if we get rid of voter IDs, then this would happen. That's what I am suggesting.
Okay, can I ask you a question very quickly?
Okay, unless we lock everyone in their house, hang on, because this is a bullshit thing. Stop interrupting me, for fuck's sakes, please. I've yet to get a sentence out. This bullshit standard would be a lot like saying, if we don't lock people in their houses, what's to stop them from going out and committing murders, right? You're talking about violating people's civil rights in order to answer for a crime that nobody's committed yet. And it's fantastical.
So you don't think, I mean, because LSP, I know you are no fan of the Republicans. Would you put it beyond Republicans morally? Would you trust these Republicans that you dislike so much to morally restrain themselves and not try to take advantage of that loophole?
So the kind of fraud that Republicans commit is when they get power, they suppress votes. That's the kind of fraud, that's what they do to win elections. They don't, the whole Watergate complex thing it's a very rare thing. What they're more likely to do is purge voter rolls, specifically with minority names, or restrict voter IDs to only these kinds of IDs white people have. Right? They're much more nefarious in the ways they have power, in the way they wield voter ID laws. And I don't want them wielding voter ID laws against otherwise innocent people.
I mean, if it's easier to get an ID, then if they have if they implement these voter ID laws and then it's followed up by a promise that they make IDs more easy to get, then would that be a reasonable solution?
No, the reasonable solution would just not require IDs in the first place because there's no fraud to justify it. Like it's just statistically non-existent,
okay.
and the people who
But
end
it
up getting hurt.
opens but when you get rid of voter IDs, that removes a safeguard that prevents that from happening. Because the reason it doesn't happen now is because we have voter IDs.
Okay, and when you when you let people freely travel, it removes a safeguard that would protect people from murders. Why is this argument any different?
Because that's a more extreme argument. Because somebody would be more likely to go out and vote in somebody's name. The average person would be more likely to do that than they would be to go and shoot somebody on Main Street or whatever.
Okay.
No, there are more murders that occur than there are voter fraud instances of voter fraud. It is not more likely that somebody's going to commit a fraud than they are going to commit a murder. So why is it you don't advocate for these safeguards? Like, why is one act of inflicting on somebody's civil rights like, why is there an imperative in this specific scenario to allow people to freely travel, but not in any of these other scenarios where you could make the exact same arguments to prevent even more serious crimes, arguably?
Just what I don't understand, though, is that getting rid of voter ID laws would open the floodgates to Republicans to go and vote for Republican candidates in the name of. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes,
I would not put that. That's not below them.
Okay, can I interject?
What these kind of people are.
Can I interject very quickly?
Yeah, go ahead.
This is imperative. So, 35 states have voter ID laws. 35 states have them, but 15 don't. Politicrat, do you think voter fraud is higher in states without voter ID laws? Because if not, your argument is not valid.
Okay, can we see some? Let's actually look up the data.
Yeah, let's actually fact check this.
Yeah, let's do that. And you know what? And if that is the case, I will concede. I'm more than happy to concede to LSP on this one. Hold on. Let me share screen.
Because if those 15 states have equal amounts of, or even less voter fraud than the 35 states that do have voter ID laws, then the argument is moot.
How should I word this?
Maybe we should. No, I think we all agree on the Chauvin verdict. Never mind.
By the way, while you're looking that up, can I ask the corporate simp a question?
Hold on. Shit.
That was a joke, by the way.
How do I wait? Hold on. Hey, does somebody else want to do this? My screen sharing is being weird. I think anybody can share the screen. How about let's have McCarthyist. Do you want to do this since you're kind of I guess?
No, I don't want to.
Okay, fine.
Okay, LSP,
we have not so nice people in the chat, so we don't want to. Yeah.
Okay. LSP, why don't you do it? Since you're
playing a game right now.
Okay, fair enough.
Hold on. I figured it out. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
But while you're looking up, can I ask him my question?
I'm kidding. Let's see.
What's up?
So corporate simp. I'm just kidding. So where do you draw the line between genuine philanthropy and virtue signaling when it comes to like the rich and the corporations?
They don't matter. Like, again, I established my position as a consequentialist. Whether your intention is to evade taxes or whether your intention is to genuinely do good, as long as you're providing positive externality to society, why should it matter? Like, intentions, by the way, like this isn't going over the fact that it's impossible to know people's true intentions anyways. Like, you can never go into someone's head and know for sure whether they were intentionally providing positive externality or whether they were just doing it to avoid taxes in some cases. So it doesn't matter. Like, consequentially, they're the same thing in my book.
All right, fair enough.
Hey guys, should we use the Guardian? No, I'm kidding.
So, what's up? What's the data showing?
I don't know. I just searched states with no voter ID laws, more fraud ?
Maybe just do states with no voter ID laws have something like that.
Do states with no voter ID laws
Have more fraud.
fraud.
More fraud.
Question mark? Question mark? That's the same thing. World population by state, maybe.
There's so many different sources. So it's hard to tell what's like actual.
If you're
By the way,
interested,
Politicrat, I'm sorry,
Here's-
LSP, go on.
okay, I know the instances of voter fraud are statistically negligent. The instances of voter disenfranchisement because of photo ID is statistically significant. I can provide you a story from Nate Silver that shows a steady decline in voter participation in states which have voter ID laws.
This one? No, that's not Nate Silver. This is 538, but it's not Nate Silver. Alex, Elena Magia, Nathaniel Ranke.
Oh my god, I love the grammar in that. I love the grammar.
Hang on, let me find it for you.
Oh, on Politicrat, are we in the home stretch of this segment? Because
yeah, we are.
We're 50 minutes in, and we pretty much all agree like the way Georgia is doing things is fucked up. We all pretty much agree on that.
Yeah. So we'll go for another 7 minutes or so. We'll go to the hour mark. We'll do our intermission, and then we will move on to the fun part.
Here's the thing. I'll post it in the StreamYard. To quote, on the surface, these studies seem to disagree with one another about whether there's any effect on turnout from harsher voter ID laws. But if you read them in more detail, you find that much of the disagreement is semantic rather than substantive. There is something of a consensus in the literature, in fact, about the rough magnitude of the effects. The stricter the laws, like those requiring photo ID, seem to decrease turnout by about 2% as a share of the registered voter population.
Politicrat, check the private chat very quickly.
I did. I saw it. So studies disagree with one another about whether or not there's effect on turnout from harsher voter identification laws. Like for me, all I want is a basic voter ID law, but it's really easy for anybody to get those IDs. Like, I don't see how that is unreasonable.
Why is the registration not enough?
I mean, registration, yeah, but like when you go and you register, they're like, here you go, we'll take your picture. Here is your voting ID. Like, it's about when you go into the polling station. Like, you shouldn't. If you vote by absentee ballot or you do mail-in, you shouldn't need a voter ID law because for obvious reasons. But if you're actually going to go to the polls and do it in person, you're doing it right there. You need to prove that it is you. That's what I'm saying. Like,
why do you need to prove that it's you?
So it's clear that you're the one who's actually voted.
Okay,
like, I mean, honestly,
I'm going to ask you.
No, because I don't understand this. If democracy is so important, why? Which I know is your stance. Like, I mean, you're probably one of the most pro-democracy people I know or have had on this stream. But I mean, if it's so important, why risk it?
Because the alternative is depressing turnout. And that's a worse outcome.
All right. I think we're at a stalemate. I think we should move on to the next segment.
Well, we're not. Like, I can beat this drum all day. He's going to have the same answer. He doesn't have any data to back up like any necessity for these laws because instances of voter fraud are just so rare.
I mean, fair enough.
I'm arguing this a priori.
I mean, that's the only way you can argue it. You have nothing empirically to like help you argue it in the otherwise case, right? Like, if you had data to argue it, you'd have the data. But there is no data suggesting that voter fraud is actually an issue, which is why these debates usually fall flat.
LSP, would you be interested by any chance in exploring this at some point in the future on another stream specifically about this, and then you and I could both go search for data? Yeah, I just wanted to say that because I mean I think we pretty much are at a stalemate here. I think that would make for a good debate at some point. But yeah, so we're wrapping up this first segment. Let's go around, I guess, just final thoughts on this whole issue, Georgia or voter ID laws, whatever. I think we all agree that it's stupid, but let's just have some put in some final words, starting with Coronis.
I mean, I really don't have much to add, to be honest, and I kind of really want to get into the next segment because that's what I've been prepared for.
Okay. McCarthyist, neoliberal, imperialist.
Again, I don't really have much of a stance on this, to be honest.
Yeah, you guys are just waiting for the fun part. All right. And Pess?
I only found out about Georgia's law about a week ago, so I barely know anything about it. So, yeah, I don't have any more comments.
I'm
Base
kind of
waifu.
I'm kind of
Same
in the same boat as Pess. However, from what I see here, I do have I am currently looking at a bullet point list of everything that has that the new law has, and I think that a lot of it is just a lot of bull crap.
Arbitrary.
I mean,
yeah.
especially a lot of arbitrary, stupid stuff that definitely is aimed at restricting voting. I mean, like especially the whole food and drink thing. I mean, that's dumb. I mean, I guess it does pave the way for people to make money by selling food and drink to people in line, but at the same time, there's just a lot of really stupid stuff on here that it's just, why did they waste their time making this?
I think it is obvious.
Tax dollars well spent.
and I'm generally the kind of wishy-washy moderate who appeals to Occam's razor, but in this case, it's clear, it's obvious what they're trying to do. Like, this is clearly some insidious shit. Like, I'm not one to go and cry voter suppression, but this is voter suppression in this case. Anyway, finally, LSP, you have any final comments on this?
On this topic, no, I guess not. Other than the Georgia law is pretty fucking foobar. Transparently, I mean, it's transparent what it's aimed to do. There is a racial aspect to this, which I imagine y'all would deny if I applied it to voter ID laws, but it applies doubly here too. Most of the drop boxes that are closed have been closed in majority black locations. Like, you cannot disentangle the demographics from the effects of these laws.
It's like, yeah, I mean, either way, regardless of whether or not it is for inherently racist reasons, they are still targeting a minority group in that instance. So, I mean, it's still, yeah. So you're absolutely correct there. Anyway.
Now time for the unfitting intermission.
All right. Yes. So we'll do intermission. I mean, the intermission technically runs for about 4 minutes, but I'd say I can give an extra 2 minutes. So I'd say let's reconvene in about 6 or so. And yeah, we will return with the fun part.
Ready, set, go. We will listen to the goal line.
you guys back?
All right, I guess we're back.
All right, still waiting on based waifu and LSP.
I'm here.
To be fair, I probably won't be alone on this because I think they have different plans. But Pest, like, you're sympathetic towards my idea as well of having a citizenship test, right? You're sympathetic, so you could like defend my position.
I don't even know what's going on anymore.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we just need to wait for where the hell are they?
I have no idea. Farlato might be joining though.
Okay. Well, where's LSP? Yeah. I have no idea where they went.
They'll probably come back soon though.
Okay.
I'm gonna wait for LSP to join and then we can discuss because most of my questions are for you and LSP. So even if the other two don't come back, it's all good. And Farlato might be joining as well after he makes food. So that's all good.
Okay. Anyway, so this stream, I mean, we were planning on having it in general, just the debating voting rights. Yeah, again, in general, and what should basically how suffrage should end up working in a the ideal. I don't want to say the ideal because it makes it sound a little too utopian, but just like a democratic society. But yeah, so I've been planning on having something kind of like this for a while, but Coronis, I know you kind of prompted me to have this stream. We were originally supposed to do it on Sunday. I'd initially advertised for it to be on Sunday.
Yeah.
But I was too tired and sleepy, and then LSP had like work or something the next morning. Either way, though, we are back. We should have who's coming? Farlando. It looks like MMI had an emergency, so he won't be joining us. I think Based Waifu probably will at some point.
I
That's
think she's coming back.
That's too bad, though, about MMI, though, because, I mean, it would have been interesting to hear his technocratic take. But either way, so for the next hour to hour and a half or so, we're going to be discussing, like I said, suffrage and the franchise. To what extent should the franchise be extended? How should the electoral system work? Basically, what should be the... I'm trying to figure out a good way to word this. How should voting rights, quote unquote, I'm just using rights loosely here because I know different people have different conception of what defines a right, but colloquially speaking, we'll just say voting rights. What would they look at? What would they look like in again, I don't want to say ideal, but just in the best society imaginable, I guess. Actually, the ideal democratic system in terms of outcomes, not in terms of necessarily principle, but in terms of what would provide the best, most stable society. I'm rambling right now, but either way, Coronis, you kind of had an idea of how you wanted this to be structured, this segment. Do you want to go ahead and kind of give a rundown of what you're thinking?
So my proposal, as I mentioned earlier, I've kind of lost a lot. I've been losing my faith in universal suffrage because of the events that happened in 2020. So, like, for example, we had conspiracy theories left and right, like conspiracy theories, fake news, a lot of things that are obviously not real. People living in their own little fantasy land played a huge role in 2020. A lot of people believed in genuine conspiracy theories, and people do not know how to discern truth from fiction. And I think that's a huge problem, which is why even though my original proposal was a test on was a test on what was it called? Civics, history, and economics. I added media literacy because I feel a citizen should be able to discern between fiction and reality. And I'm referring to like basic stuff like .gov and .edu sources are preferable to .com sources. And when you read an article, you should ask like, what's the bias of the author? What political motives might he have for why he's making the claims he is? Just simple stuff that you're taught in high school, but it should be known by every citizen and it should be jammed into your head. So when you do take a test on that particular subject, you demonstrate that you know how to identify fake news and the like, because that was a major problem in both 2016 and 2020.
Okay, and what was your position prior to that? Were you generally like?
I was generally like on LSP side. I was generally on like the whole let the masses reign and tyranny of the majority is a spook and stuff like that. Yeah, I was generally on like I was like sort of like on LSP's side when it came to democracy, but I'm sorry, I care more about the fate of the republic and the rights that it comes with and a stable economy than I care about virtue signaling about the benefits of democracy. I'm sorry, but to expand on what I said about media literacy. So, I mean, again, as we saw, people are completely literate when it comes to social media. People easily fall for conspiracy theories, fake news, and I'm sure you know, foreign propaganda outlets like Russia Today. And to counter this, every citizen should know how to fact check every article they read and not believe everything their friends share. And they should go like a hierarchy of reliability and should know how to judge bias. So I don't think that's a radical proposition on what people should be tested on. That. Do you agree that citizens should know how to discern fact from fiction?
Voters should. I would say that. Yes, voters should.
Yeah, I mean that's what I'm saying though. Like voters should. That's what I mean by citizens. I mean voters should. I think an idea.
You could be a citizen and you don't have to vote, but if you're
I know
vote,
that's
yes,
I should use voter then.
Yeah. All right. So do you want to go ahead and make opening statements, or was that pretty much it?
Oh no. I mean, I was just getting into why I added media literacy, but I can read the overall plan that I have, if that's okay.
Well, we'll get to that in a. Actually, yeah. Let's do that. But first, let's let LSP say something. Just sort of, not necessarily give a rundown in depth of what his system would be, but just let him.
Yeah, I just want to do that though in a second.
Yeah.
My good friend Coronis, and everything he just said.
Well, no, we're not trying to do a rebut. We're not trying to do a
lot of bullshit. that is all I gotta say.
All right.
All right. And Pess?
Okay, so my general position is that liberal democracy is the best form of government we have so far. And that doesn't mean there won't be any superior systems. So as an advocate of liberal democracy, as a neoconservative, my opinion is that in order to defend liberal democracy, we have to be its harshest critics. So using a model outlined by the professor Daniel A. Bell, I have 4 objections to liberal democracy and then 4 solutions to those very specific objections.
And we'll get into that. We'll get into that in a moment. As soon as everybody we'll go around and propose our positions. We'll end with me. We will start with Coronis. Just give you 2 minutes to go ahead and lay down what your system would be, more or less.
So basically, so as I said before, I've lost my faith in universal suffrage. So I think there should be a test that all citizens should take if they want to vote. And there are several reasons for this. I think citizens should demonstrate discipline and a willingness to be a caring citizen. Studying for this test will take a lot of time and patience, and it's sort of modeled after the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services test, but it has additional stuff added to it. And keep in mind that the vast majority who take and pass that test are immigrants from some of the poorest countries on Earth right now. So it's not necessarily impossible for the average citizen to take it, but I think you should demonstrate, like, you should care about the topics mentioned, that you should understand the gravity of what you're voting for and why, and it would also help you demonstrate the characteristics I feel every citizen in a republic should possess. So here's my proposal. So basically, there would be a commissioner agency like the USCIS. I'm sorry, the USCIS. Yes, that would distribute the test. The test would randomly select 50 out of 500 questions drawn from a bank of 500 questions, all of which relate to the history of the United States, the branches of government and their roles, micro and macroeconomics, and how to identify fake news, etc. So, who is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court? Name 6 of the 13 colonies. What do economic problems primarily stem from? What were the Moral Tariffs Act? What is the Laffer curve? What is a better source of information, .com or .gov? And you must get a score of 70 or higher to earn the right to vote. The agency or commission, however, would be headed by an oversight board consisting evenly of Democrats and Republicans operating under a 2/3 majority vote to prevent partisan bias and to ensure.
What about the Green Party?
I mean, if a third party wins, then we can adjust. But obviously, I'm working within the frame of the two-party system. So basically, you need to pass a test on things that you have to know when you enter the United States, but also directly on policy, like economics and the like. Because if you are voting for like a minimum wage increase, for example, despite all the harms it brings, you should know why you would advocate for such a policy, in my opinion. So, that's basically my policy. An agency that would distribute a test, and if you pass the test, you earn the right to vote.
So, what do you guys think? Do you think we should go one by one and just up front first have everybody kind of lay out their idea and then go to kind of cross-examinations? Or do you think after everybody goes, we should go ahead and cross-examine basically or challenge what they said? LSP, what do you think?
Whatever you want.
Okay. Actually, yeah, let's wait. Let's have, or you know what? Let's wait, and we'll sort of
maybe we should,
because I do have some criticisms, significant criticisms of your system, but we'll get to that momentarily. Next, LSP, please go ahead and lay out what your favored franchise system would be. I don't know better way to word it, but do what Coronis did, but with your stuff.
Do what Coronis did, but with my stuff. If I could invent the perfect state, assuming I put on a veil of ignorance so that I know nothing about myself, the fairest system I could invent would be a system called liberal democracy, right? A system where minority rights are protected, but political representation is ubiquitous and people are enfranchised and they have a right to be represented by the people who lead them. That is a perfect system to me. Democracy, the reason I don't defend, I think if you're approaching democracy from like an outcome-oriented perspective rather than an input-oriented perspective, you're going to get like some really stupid standards. I'm sorry, Cronus. I think like you might as well just say, I want to ban all things bad and I want to keep all things good.
I'm for good things and against bad things.
Yeah, the whole point of democracy is for the people to decide what's good and bad of their own free will. Democracy isn't designed to give you necessarily a good system. It's designed to give you a system you deserve, which I think is probably the fairest approach you could take to it. If we assume we're in a state of nature, that I exist in a state of nature and Coronis exists in a state of nature, and we both have resources and we both either want to protect each other from the elements or outsiders, or we want each other's resources, so we want to kill each other and take their resources, we have to find some way to resolve this. Because if we live in a world where everybody just does what they want, you're going to live in a world where a lot of people are going to war constantly, where there's no way to live with Coronis except that I have to kill him because he has different ideas than me, and I got to resolve that. The best resolution for this seems to be, what if we all got together and said, let's not kill each other for our ideas? What if we just all agreed that whoever's got the best idea, and not best in the sense that the majority opt for it, when we go with that? And you know what? to make sure that there's no permanent damage, let's have elections frequently so that if one of us is wrong about our ideas, even if that's what the majority votes for at a given time, we can reverse it later on. Like, that seems to be the perfect system to me, because it enfranchises everybody, all of whom have a wide variety of different ideas. It ensures, in fact, I would argue it ensures some political cooperation between the classes. It is a fact. Some of us are fucking stupid. It is frightening to me that my girlfriend couldn't vote in Cronus' system. My girlfriend who was blind, right? My girlfriend who couldn't answer any of these questions he puts on his. I don't think I could answer like half those questions he puts on his test. A literacy test is scary to me. You know, and I have a bachelor's degree in political science. I couldn't answer some of these questions, but there are perfectly intelligent people out there who have an interest in their community because they live in these communities and they want to see these communities be improved. They want to see the world they live in be better. They want schools improved. They want roads improved. They want police on their corners. They can't vote on, you know, their leaders to direct these things because somebody's decided they're not politically intelligent enough to know what's best for them. That seems so superior and arrogant to me. I couldn't fathom it. Yeah, I guess that's my take.
Okay, thank you. Pess, do you want to go ahead and, because I understand you have a really interesting system, at least from how, if what Coronis described to me, well, what your system is correct. It is very interesting and elitist, yet somehow still liberally democratic. Kind of reminds me of Coronis's a little, but instead of like based upon empirical like knowledge on certain issues, it kind of has, I guess, more of a aristocratic, metaphysical kind of connotation to a very yeah. I'll just have you explain it. It's your the thing having to do with something with art and music.
It's partially that. You see, there is an ideal system that we all envision and we all want. What I'm proposing tonight is basically, what can we do within the confines of the American Constitution? How can we improve upon it that is closest to the spirit of the original documents? So with that in mind, I wrote down, using Daniel A. Bell's model, to 4 objections to liberal democracy, 4 critiques of liberal democracy, and then I offer 4 solutions that could improve liberal democracy. So it's sort of like a challenging liberal democracy, but at the same time trying to save it. So that's basically what I have written down here for my notes. Do you want me to go ahead?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so obviously the first objection to liberal democracy is one that many people can agree upon. It's tyranny of the mob, the crowd, the majority, what you want to call it. What happens is that studies upon studies have shown that voters often have poor knowledge of basic political issues. According to a certain poll, some Americans, around 20%, when asked, they believe that the 3 branches of government are Republican, Democrat, and Independent. So it just shows that there is basic disconnect. And because of this disconnect, this often leads to situations like what we saw in 2016 with demagoguery, for instance. So with that in mind, I guess what I feel as could be a solution to that is making political appointments meritocratic. So how would we do this? It usually start with the education system, where someone has to meet basic prerequisites in order to get into office. So there would be the highest scoring students would go to special training schools, and then they would, based on their performance, they would be put into a talent pool, for instance, and then they would be appointed to lower levels of government. And from there on, they can move on to higher levels of government based on their performance at the lower levels of government. So that's one solution. So secondly, I have here, the second objection to liberal democracy is the tyranny of the special interest groups. So you have a lot of corporations pouring money into politics, and oftentimes these can have both positive and negative effects on the entire system. So, and basically my proposal to that is to sort of curb the special interest groups, usually by attempting to make the political system as isolated from the financial or economic system as possible. The third objection to liberal democracy that I have written down is tyranny of the present generation without taking into account the future generations. So for instance, we have things like climate change, like the national debt. These are things that in the short term do not affect us, but then they are passed down onto our descendants and they have to clean it up for us. So with that in mind, I propose very basically that at a very minimum, all bills passed by Congress should take into account and conform to a certain long-term plan to sort of take into the interest of the future generations. And finally, last but not least, and this is my favorite one, is the last objection to liberal democracy would be the tyranny of the competitive individualist, which is basically where parties and candidates often engage in negative campaigning. And this negative campaigning, things like, for instance, putting their own political prospects ahead of the national interest. This can often cause what in the Confucian concept would be considered disharmony, where everyone's essentially looking out for themselves, though all the politicians are looking out for themselves and not the greater good. So, and my final solution to that is to ban all political parties like the founding fathers originally wanted. So have a completely nonpartisan political system. The United States political system is first past the votes. It's not designed for political parties like a proportional representation system is. It's designed for every candidate being an independent and standing on its own merits. So that's generally my outline of what I have written down. So thank you.
Well, I pretty much agree with everything you said, basically.
Well, what about the part that, like, have something about having studied art and music? Something Coronis mentioned something like that to me.
Nietzsche.
Yeah,
that was in a discussion on Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophy.
Oh, okay. I think I misunderstood.
Yeah. Nietzsche advocated for an aristocracy, and I think his ideal system, according to Pass, would basically be you need a military background, and you also need a background, an educational background in philosophy, music, or art. And it's very interesting. To be fair, Nietzsche was kind of biased because Nietzsche was, in some sense, a failed musician, and I also think he did paintings of his own, if I recall correctly. But and he also was conscripted into the Prussian military in 1870. So I mean, it kind of seems like he considers himself an aristocrat, but that's fair enough, I guess. But I mean, Pess, am I articulating that well?
Yeah, broadly speaking.
Okay.
Nietzsche spoke in very broadly metaphysical terms, so he would put a lot of emphasis on his aristocracy having superior characteristics in music and art.
So it's basically like a reimagined philosopher kings.
Yes.
It's more like philosopher legislators.
Correct.
All right. By the way, since this is a formal discussion, it's like we'll go back around and I'll be able to ask questions or rebut uninterrupted because I have a lot to say.
So I guess I'll go into actually. Hold on a second. I have to find. I didn't take notes for this one. I've been so busy. I had a very busy day today, and it was pretty uneventful in the end. I won't go into detail, but I'm very disappointed by the outcome of the thing I did today. But either way, I didn't have enough time to take notes, so I'm kind of just doing this on the fly. Hold on, I have a citation here. I'm trying to find. All right, so hold on. Coronis, actually, entertain us while I get ready.
So I get 2 minutes uninterrupted to respond to LSP and whatnot.
No, just entertain us. Just talk about democracy.
Okay, because I really want to respond to LSP, but
we're gonna get there. I want to stay relatively structured with that. Yeah.
Yeah, because I do have a response to what LSP said. I wrote it all down actually while he and Pest were talking. So yeah, just I'm gonna wait for that to wait until I get a few minutes of uninterrupted talking to respond to him. But more
Okay.
to I think Pest do you think Nietzsche would approve of any other educational backgrounds for his ideal political system, or do you think he thought art and music? Why do you think art and music were so integral to someone being a good legislator?
Well, I think it all goes down to his basic his basic metaphysical views that often disparaged people who only took tests, passed them, and then moved on. So he wanted keep in mind, he speaks very, very vaguely. He's never at any point does he actually outline an ideal political system. We can only go by his basic writings that he basically identified with the term, or like the term aristocratic radicalism. And his aristocracy, his ideal aristocracy, would be generally well-rounded, but he generally believed that military people who went to people who were artists, people who were musicians, that these were higher human beings and produced superior culture, higher culture, and created new values. And he pretty much viewed these as being superior to all other forms. Though I'm not sure he would object to any other form of education. It's just that certain qualities take precedence over others.
All right. So I guess I will go ahead and lay out my basic framework of what I think the best system would be. I'm going to start out by saying
Starship Troopers.
God, no, hold on. It's not. It's not just. It's first of all, we're talking about the book. Second of all, there's more to it than that, because there are definitely some problems with Heinlein's framework, how he ends up. I think his system's a little too brutal, personally, but I think he kind of he sets some fantastic precedents and makes good arguments, but we're not taught. This is not a Heinlein stream. I just incorporated some of his basic ideas into what I would propose. So more or less, well, I'm sorry. I lost my train of thought. I was going to start by saying something, but I forgot what it was now. Whatever. I'll just get into it. So we need to remember that Western civilization has, in terms of its philosophical ideas, in terms of course, Western civilization is the civilization that holds the idea of progress above all else. Different cultures have their own worldviews and sort of their own themes and their own motifs that sort of shape how they view the world, how they understand existence, the human experience, all of that. The Western, specifically deriving in Europe, you can make an argument that it dates back in a way to the Greco-Roman times, or that it comes from Christianity. Or I'd say that our modern conception of progress is sort of the result of a synthesis between both. But either way, going back especially to Aristotle, it has always been about moderation. It has always been about progress. Like, progress has been made. The greatest incidents of human progress, our moving forward, have not happened as a result of radical revolutions, but by a series of compromises and concessions. And I'm not making some sort of Hegelian synthesis argument right here. However, I do think there still is something to some of Hegel's ideas in that regard. But either way, in order to maintain a healthy society that continues to progress forward and make these changes that are necessary in order to, again, sustain a healthy society, we need to have a system that is not radical. Radicalism is on both sides. You have traditional reactionaries. I just say that in the most basic sense. And then, of course, you have the revolutionaries. Generally, we've seen with revolutionary systems, the system they end up setting up generally tends to be as oppressive, if not more oppressive, than the one that they overthrew. You see that in Soviet Russia. You saw that in Soviet Russia. You saw that in France. You saw that in some of the ancient Greco-Roman cities and city-states and kingdoms. But the most successful system to work as it results to sustaining stability and as it results or as it relates to nurturing progress has been Anglo-American style liberal democracy, which is a much more moderate form of liberalism as it existed on the continent beginning during the Enlightenment. It was not inherently revolutionary. It was about incrementalism. It was about making compromises. It was about, as like Thomas Sowell would say, the founding fathers and the rogues gallery of the British Enlightenment were all about making concessions. So they understood that democracy was a successful tool in order to drive us further towards, whether based upon like a utilitarian argument, it would be towards happiness, or based on a natural rights argument, it would be just freedom in general, freedom being the ends. But yeah, they understood that. And as a result, they were able to establish the first true successful liberal democracies in the form of course, the United Kingdom and the United States. And eventually, after the radical continental liberalism failed, you saw countries like France and Germany more or less adopt a similar type system. What we need to do when we take a look at democracy, because we see the word democracy thrown around all the time on both sides of the aisle. And I'm not here, just to let you know up front, I'm not here to make some sort of, America is a republic, it's not a democracy, like that Steven Crowder-ish take, because I mean, that's not even what we're talking about. So don't think that that's the point I'm trying to make. But we see this word democracy thrown around, like we need to protect our democracy, or our democracy is the most important thing we have. Basically treating it as if it is some sort of almost venerating it in a religious sort of way. And that's sort of out of touch with the vision or the ideals of the people who set up that democracy in the first place. We need to remember that modern society, beginning back with the Enlightenment, was not built upon the values of democracy, equality, and materialism. It was built upon the ideas of life, liberty, and property. Democracy, equality, and materialism were seen as tools in order to advance the values of life, liberty, and property. Practical tools. Democracy was never intended to be a value in and of itself. It was meant to be a mechanism. Therefore, because we have seen in the past, as Benjamin Franklin said, no, John Adams said, every democracy ends up committing suicide in the end. Every single example of a historical democracy we've seen, and I know that many of them weren't liberal democracies, but we have seen traditional democracies in the style of like Athens and ancient Thebes and the Roman Republic. Of course, they committed suicide, and we've seen it with more contemporary liberal democracies today. Therefore, democracy's death lies within itself fundamentally. It is a flawed idea. It is a noble idea, but it is a very, very flawed one. And in order for democracy to work effectively, it needs to be kept in chains. There needs to be safeguards placed around it. It needs to work within the framework of a constitution. And I know that that's what liberal democracy is. And so I guess this is my main criticism of LSP here. I know we're not getting into the whole rebuttal aspect yet, but I am just going to say mass democracy is inherently illiberal. It is inherently radical. And a liberal democracy would be one that has constraints put around it, that places liberty at the center, is liberal liberty. And then democracy should work within the framework of advancing liberalism itself. Political rights are not the same as civil liberties. They're two totally different things. One is more practical, one is more, I guess, transcendent. Maybe that's not the best word to say, but either way, in order to maintain a system that is functional in the long run, we need to have something to keep democracy in check. And that's why I am proposing that I really wish I had written this down. I really can't talk off the top of my head like you guys can. But I'm just going to go ahead and say that I do not think that it is conducive to democracy as a whole that people are born with the right to vote. People take more seriously, people value more that which they earn as opposed to that which is given. And that's why I believe that, yes, we should, to be in a free society, to be in a liberal society that functions within a democratic framework, or rather utilizes it as a tool, would require having access to engagement in electoral politics. However, to just automatically grant somebody the right to participate in electoral politics is dangerous, because it will end up destroying the system that made it possible for them to engage in electoral politics in the first place. So the most qualified person, I would say, in the moral sense, so this is arguing more or less based off of some kind of Aristotelian virtue ethics, I guess that might be the best way to say it. But in order to have a say over, or in order to have a say in the political system, you should actually have to demonstrate that I really wish I'd written this down. You have to be able to demonstrate that you're worthy, I suppose. That might be a good way of putting it.
That you're willing to sacrifice yourself for the benefit of the nation.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
I did not get any sleep last night, so that's probably.
I know, and you've been talking for like 10 minutes straight.
I know, and I haven't really.
And we kind of want to like rebut each other.
I'm really sorry about that. I'm not thinking.
I mean, I basically just want to say, like, you're basically you'd be willing. It's a moral argument that you basically want people who demonstrate they actually care about the country, that they're willing to sacrifice themselves for the benefit of the community, should have a say in politics.
Exactly. And so I don't think it has to do, there's a problem with technocracy. Like, I could go and criticize MMI for his position all night long, because it's not just that it's elitist, it's also that you don't know the motivations of those. Yeah, you can have like the smartest people in the world controlling things, but like, what if they are just simply not good people and they'll do it for their own benefit? However, do you really think that somebody will be willing to lay their life down for a cause that they don't believe in? No. Not at all. So I suggest that in order to vote, and this would all be voluntary, 2 years of some kind of civil or military service. You're guaranteed every single right that you have under the law right now, under the Constitution right now. But the one exception is that suffrage is itself not the right, but rather it is the right to pursue suffrage. Anybody can end up pursuing suffrage, saying, hey, I want to vote. I want to be able to run for public office. However, they need to prove that they're serious about that, which would mean, so I know like the Starship Troopers movie, for instance, it was 2 years of specifically military service. The book, there were other ways to go about doing it as well. Mine would expand it even beyond that and say, okay, not everybody's cut out for military service, mentally, physically, and then some people just might not have any interest in joining the military, but might want to do something else, but might want to join or participate in the franchise just as much, but would rather go about a different route, which is good. So that would also include forms of civil service, like a firefighter, for example, or an EMP, or even something like joining the Peace Corps. You're doing something. You need to demonstrate to society by giving something to society that you have a right to participate in the decision-making process that affects society. For instance, why the hell should some Jabba the Hutt slob who is 30 years old, never been employed, willfully unemployed, lives in his grandma's basement, watching the Kardashians eating potato chips all day? Why should he have the same right to participate, or why should he have the same say in the political decision-making process as somebody who did 2 tours of Afghanistan?
Oh, you're absolutely right. He shouldn't. The person who has 2 tours in Afghanistan should have like double the voting rights. And you know what? Rich people should have more voting rights. And you know what? Good Christian people should have more voting rights. Like, why even stop there? If you're Muslim, I mean, you don't share the same values I do. You're probably not going to, act in service to the same church. I mean, in what sense would you really take, an interest in my community if you're fundamentally not a part of it, right? So why not, why restrict it just on the basis of action? Let's just start carving up everybody and say they can't vote. Also, okay. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Jesus, fuck, dude, that was like 20 minutes. Can we?
Yeah. Can we please do the rebuttal period? We can respond to each other.
No, I'm actually really sorry about that. I really should have taken notes. I shouldn't have stayed up all night last night.
After the stream is over, you should try to find a way to cut out the excess. I'm sorry, my friend, but you really need to cut some of that out if you can.
I do. I really, yeah.
Please move on. Please, I beg of you.
Yeah, then that whole meandering. I don't know what there's not really a cohesive point in defense of democracy. You're arguing democracy is just inherently self-destructive if it's allowed that other
people to put safeguards in place to make sure that it doesn't.
We have a safeguard. It's the Constitution. We have a safeguard. It's the Constitution. A lot of liberal democracies have safeguards without restricting people's voting rights. You can have safeguards.
We're going to start with Coronis, though. We're going to start with cross-examinations. LSP, I know you'll have a lot to say against mine, but my first thing against Coronis is your idea of, you said people have to not only be able to explain how the system or the process works, but they also have to explain policy and explain all of this, like the Laffer curve and all of that stuff.
My main problem. Can you tell me what the Laffer curve is?
It's like it's the thing like.
I know what the Laffer curve is. I want him to tell me what the Laffer curve is.
But this is a formal debate, guys. Come on. Let Politicrat finish his statement.
Yeah. Okay. So
we'll be here 2 centuries, but okay.
No. So you were saying, for instance, people need to be able to explain what the Laffer curve are, what these policies are, what their outcomes are, blah, 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 blah. First of all, we know that governments and states are inherently, they're run by ideological people most of the time. What is to stop them from changing this sort of testing system to make it line up with their agenda. Because I mean, I think we're at a point right now where empirical arguments really don't get anybody anywhere. Like two different sides can present all of this empirical data, and in the end, they probably still won't agree. So on that, there's always going to be a bias towards it. Plus, I don't see why you should have to know like all of these nitty gritty little details about how about policy itself when you could just explain how the system, when you should just be able to explain how the system works. I mean, that seems good enough for me. I mean, it just seems like you're trying to cut certain people out who aren't maybe I don't want to say dumb, but
I mean, I don't want to be
capable
mean. We got all your points. Politicrat, you want democracy restricted because it's a safeguard against itself.
Well, we're talking to
tests.
Coronis right now. We're not at me now. We're talking to Coronis right now.
Well, we could sum this up in a single sentence. He wants to test. He's a technocrat. He wants to test. I'm sorry, but Jesus fuck. Are we going to have a conversation?
We're doing it formal. We're doing this formal. Like everybody gets like 2 minutes.
This is not how a formal debate is conducted.
Okay, then we should do it that way. Politicrat, can we please make this more formal?
Well, does anybody have anything to say to Coronis? We can. Do you guys want to make it more formal? I'm sorry, I should not have gone off on that tangent. Again, I really.
We were there for 20 minutes, dog.
I'm really sorry to the viewers too. Yeah. I could have said that in like 2 minutes.
Yeah, just cut it. Just cut out the excesses when you edit the stream. It's chill, but we kind of wish you would get on with it. Okay, but it's fine. It's fine. But let's just do this more formally. Like everybody gets 3 minutes to like respond to each other. I think that's completely fair.
Okay. I'm just going to question why should they be able to answer all like these policy related things? Like, why is that relevant? Why shouldn't they just be able to, why shouldn't it be like under your system? I see just doing a basic citizenship test, like what every single immigrant applying for citizenship does. I mean, why wouldn't that suffice? Why should you have to explain all of these little policy, economic, and yeah, like why should you have to have some sort of deep understanding of public policy? Can you explain that? Because that just seems excessive, and it seems like you're kind of cutting people out.
Can we do it in a way that like I respond to everyone individually after they talk to me? Isn't that the original?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because I think you and LSP share the similar criticisms.
Okay, so LSP, what would your criticism of Coronis be?
It's stupid. Do you want a more formal criticism? It's anti-liberal for one. I mean, you've constructed kind of like a Putin-esque system where you're basically saying, well, the poor they can't participate in democracy because they don't have access to the proper education that would otherwise give them access to these political systems. So the wealthy are going to be deciding their politics for them. I find that to be a little contemptible. And of course, this is also going to, because intersectionality is a thing, it's also going to like fall down racial lines too. You go to a shitty neighborhood. If you live in a shitty neighborhood, go to a shitty school, you're probably not going to learn a lot about the civics that Coronis wants to test people for, right? There's also people with, God bless them, physical disabilities that might impede their ability to understand some of these concepts that Coronis, again, wants to basically say their rights are contingent upon knowledge of. This is a ridiculous system. It is ridiculous that the blind or the mentally retarded or the poor, that there's any wide berth of people cannot vote, cannot have any sort of political enfranchisement to decide their own future because somebody's decided that they won't be able to vote. They're not smart enough to decide what's best for themselves. It's elitist. It's elitist. It's anti-democratic. It's anti-liberal. It flies in the face of anything Republican. Small R Republican.
I would agree with that, actually. Pess, what would you have to respond to Coronis's criteria?
Yeah, I was quite thinking about it for a while. It's very similar to what Brian Kaplan argued in his book, The Myth of the Rational Voter, where he basically says people should have to take an economics test before they get the right to vote. I guess my objection would be that it's sort of like, or number one, I don't think many people, including myself, would trust an independent agency to create these tests, for instance, and update them reliably every election cycle, for instance. And in addition, it also could create problems with, it could create very controversial, it could create controversy. What I'm saying is that people who pass the test would be considered to be superior to those who don't pass the test. And because of that, it could create a sort of dichotomy where there exists sort of tension and envy, and that could unleash forces that particularly I wouldn't want to unleash, for instance. But other than that, if it had to go through anything, I probably would vote for it, ironically enough, even though I just criticized it. Because, yes, I do believe people should be informed on these issues, but I do believe there are serious problems with the system.
All right, so I'm going to respond to all three of you, and this will take just a few minutes. Am I able to?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. So the difference is I'm an outcome-driven individual. If a democracy fucks up, I'm perfectly fine with undermining it. A great example is when Congress undermined the Reagan administration in the 80s with funding the Contras, even though backing that insurrection was necessary to get rid of the Sandinistas and restore the balance of power to Latin America. So I think the Iran-Contra affair was completely justified, even though it undermined what LSP would call the will of the people. The will of the people is why we lost Vietnam, because cowards who knew nothing about foreign policy undermined the interests of the nation because they did not know what was good for them. And there are certain excesses that pure democracy can bring about that will eventually result in societal collapse. Those of the lower classes, for instance, naturally envy the wealthy. Towards the end of the Roman Republic, democratically elected populist tribunes tried to redistribute land from the wealthy to the poor. This is why the founding fathers, those who valued property rights, even at the expense of the tyranny of the majority, wanted only those whose property was of a certain value to vote, since that implied a sense of responsibility and/or education, including James Madison. I'm for limiting votes to those who do not, I'm for restricting the votes of those who do not exhibit certain positive characteristics, because in the long term, that is essential as a safeguard to maintaining human flourishing, which is a liberal value if you are a utilitarian. As Pest just mentioned, most voters are ignorant about the issues they are concerned about. Ignorance is how a democracy collapses, as the dumb are easy to manipulate. When you deny those who know nothing about politics the ability to vote, politicians will have to understand they are dealing with a decently educated population that's more difficult to manipulate. As for your comment about your girlfriend not being able to vote in my system, blind people in school take tests, and they
blind people would fare better in my system.
I'm supposed to be uninterrupted. So, that's how your girlfriend would be able to vote in my system that I'm advocating for. There would be like a separate test for blind people, obviously. You made a literal appeal to emotion that is both meaningless and arbitrary to me. Also, Pest, that's why I advocate for a bipartisan oversight board, so the test would never favor one side of the spectrum over the other. I advocate for neutrality. Now, MMI was the one who argued it should be based on policy, and he acknowledged that it would favor his side. But I tend to agree that neutrality is sort of necessary in politics. But yeah. So my understanding, and by the way, my understanding of the Laffer curve is it refers to a paradox, that the lower the taxation, the higher the revenue. There's an equilibrium, a curve you should aspire to, because when taxes are low enough, then you can spend more, and going beyond or below that curve will result in a deficit. And if that explanation isn't good enough, then fine, because my system says you need a score of 70 or higher. So you can still miss a few questions while getting some answers incorrect or half incorrect, because we are flawed. And we're probably going to mess up a few things or misunderstand a basic concept, which is fine. And by the way, Gautier is willing to join again.
Okay, cool.
But yeah, that's basically it. That's my response to all of you guys. And now you guys have the ability to respond to me uninterrupted.
All right, who wants to go first?
Once again, just a load of like really stupid shit. So firstly, this idea that I'm appealing to emotion, there's something invalid about what I'm arguing is I'm a total non sequitur dismissal. Emotion is valid here. You need to count on the emotions of people who you're going to be disenfranchising, because when people are disenfranchised enough, they tend to get violent. Right, the French Revolution wasn't born out of like ignorant voters being apathetic to the monarchy spending habits. Right, like these were people who were disenfranchised, and they took matters into their own hands. If you don't want people to get that point, I mean, what you're advocating for is a stone's throw away from being fascist. It really is. Basically, you just want this. Well, because it's complete upward power towards the state, right? It is singularly devoted to the state. It is enfranchised. It tries to claim to be protecting liberal values, erstwhile disenfranchising. I don't know how many millions of people it would be disenfranchising in this country. And it's also like heavily elitist. Like that's what I would call fascist. It solidifies hierarchy. It extols the hierarchy. It loves the hierarchy. That's what makes it fascist. It is anti-individual. It is anti-liberal. It's anti-republic. You can call that an appeal to emotion. I call that an appeal to stability. Your system will not produce stability. I don't know where this meme comes from, that if you give people more political enfranchisement, that democracy will fail. We're the oldest democracy in the world right now, and we've been giving people political enfranchisement since our fucking beginning. Like it was limited to landowners, then we limited it to non-landowners, then we said women can vote and black people can vote. Like we've been doing nothing but enfranchising more and more people. And I don't know, we're still the most powerful country in the world, the highest GDP in the world, the world's strongest military. When is our inevitable collapse going to come? Because all we've done is enfranchise people to vote. There's no empirical backing to anything Coronis is saying. It is just blind fear mongering about the political sensibilities of people who think differently from him.
Can I respond? Can I make a point real quick?
Yes.
Well, I'd say I broadly agree with Coronis's general sentiment that voting should be restricted. As I said, in an ideal system, no one would vote. It would be completely platonic. But understanding we don't live in that. It's probably never going to happen, and we are working within the confines of liberal democracy, which is why. Considering the history of voting rights in the country, where the civil rights movement, for instance, the women's suffrage movement, because of those things, it could very much create controversy. That would be very destabilizing, in my opinion, which is why I guess in my system, instead of making the voters take tests, we make the politicians meet certain qualifications. But I'm going too far ahead of myself. So that's just me adding on to what I said before.
I mean, I more or less, with an exception of so I do believe that liberalism can exist in your system, because I wouldn't go to the extent that LSP criticized you on. However, I do more or less agree with him that taking such a test, especially something so rigorous, when you're tested on such specialized subjects such as economics and again public policy, that does shut certain people out who either lack the capability of understanding that. I do believe that you should have to prove that you have a right to participate in the political decision-making process. However, I think
privilege. Don't call it a right. If you have
privilege,
it's
privilege.
Not a right.
Okay, yeah. You should, So you should have a right to obtain that privilege. I agree there. However, I think that there are more basic ways of doing that won't alienate certain people. That's what I have to say. So I more or less agree with LSP on this, however, to a slightly lesser degree, because I still do think that your system could protect civil liberties. However, it would still, regardless, be at the expense of political rights.
I would just like to, I mean, I agree with with Pessimistic Titan that I think maybe a possibly a better solution would be to screen the candidates and make them like maybe take a test, because the candidate taking a test is probably would be much more feasible to enact, because because as much as I would like people who are voting to know basic economics and like just a basic fundamental understanding of how the government works, like they should be teaching in our schools. There's people are going to compare that to like the literacy test that they used to give Black people during Jim Crow. I know for a fact that would happen, and that's why stuff like that probably would
It
not.
is like it. That's what it is. It might not be targeted towards race, but it's a literacy test.
I mean,
it's designed.
If it's something like basically like, oh, how does a government function like with like?
Flicker, let MMI in for a second.
Yeah, but
coming back.
What? Oh, he's came back. Hi, hello.
So I'm gonna say one thing to defend Coronis here. So I obviously completely support what Coronis is saying, that there ought to be a test. But I'll distinct. There needs to be some good distinction between a test that tests one's politics knowledge and one that tests policy knowledge. And the difference between the two is that when you're testing someone's political knowledge, that means that they'll be tested on whether they know the third branches of government, and there would be the system that we live in, the institutions that are in place here. A policy test, on the other hand, would test whether they would know the impact of a certain fiscal or foreign policy and what it will mean. And I'm more inclined to support a system that tests policy as opposed to politics, because if we say that the tests ask their test takers what U.S. retrenchment means for the world, a lot of voters don't even know what would actually happen to withdraw troops from a key area. They just believe that, oh, we just simply don't need to be there. Why are we interfering in other foreign affairs, right? But the point of a policy test would be to test whether they even know the implications of American isolationism and how destructive they are. The point is to educate and give more weight to people who have a more sound policy take and policy knowledge on a given area, and that completely makes sense. And it doesn't necessarily mean disenfranchising anybody. It could simply mean having a weighted voting system where an individual's vote counts more than someone else's who simply doesn't.
By definition, that's disenfranchising.
Yeah, I mean, less of
your vote counts for twice as much as mine does. By definition,
I'm not saying that you're accusing Coronis of disenfranchising, but it is reasonable to say that a person who has much more of a knowledge in foreign policy and economic policy ought to count more than someone who either doesn't take the test or is very bad at them.
I mean, I think like Pest. I really like Pest's idea with like the candidates that are running should take a test to make sure that they know basic fundamentals and everything, because that would be something that would prevent like the whole test controversy from even happening. I mean, if it's the candidates, people will most definitely understand that they should know all this shit. They should know everything that's implications of isolationism. They should know basic foreign policy. They should know where Aleppo is.
I mean,
okay. Do you know where Aleppo is?
I know I made an old joke. I'm sorry.
Gary Johnson.
Outdated meme. I'm sorry.
One thing about democracy is that democracy, well, a pure functional democracy is mathematically impossible. And I'm not just saying that in like a pedantic sense. It's literally right there, called the Arrow's impossibility theorem. You can't possibly have a democratic system that perfectly caters towards everyone's preferences. That's literally impossible. And the one criterion that can be circumvented to prevent this is the non-dictatorship. And I'm not here to defend dictatorship or anything like that, but the point is that a perfect democracy can exist only insofar as the axiom that allows preference, a certain group's preference is prioritized over the other. Then a perfect democracy can work. And the axioms that constitute a perfect democracy include not only non-dictatorship, but also something like I believe it was by ordering. What was it again? Yeah. That's something to keep in mind, and like a lot of, and I believe it was also there's pairwise voting and cardinal voting, but yeah. So Pareto efficiency is one of them. Monotonicity is other, and independence of irrelevant alternatives. But yeah, it's impossible to keep. It's axiomatically impossible to keep all these satisfaction, and that is objectively why a perfect democracy is not a feasible option.
I mean, that doesn't really address anything. Like, yeah, I don't think anybody's arguing that you could have a democracy where everyone is satisfied. By nature, somebody's got to be unsatisfied, right? Unless society's voting 100%.
Politics are, as I have learned the hard way. But yeah, I think people are asking, did we talk about the whole children voting thing?
No. Okay, so here's my take on the children's voting thing. And
no, wait. We're doing this formally, but
Coronis.
No. Let's do this informally, for fuck's sakes. It's 10:30 at night. Exactly. I don't want to sit through like another 10-minute spiel. Just talk like normal people.
I mean, I would be fine with having children vote as long as they have the knowledge, right? Why is it that we actually don't allow children from voting? It's because they haven't developed a cognitive ability to think properly, right? But let's suppose that they actually have developed the cognitive ability to vote or have policy ideas. I don't know why they shouldn't be barred from voting in that case. So like the determinant in which your weight of the vote or your quote unquote right to vote, and by the way, right as a concept is a normative concept, not a positive one. Like a lot of people confuse that. Like it's as if right is something that is just God-given or whatever. It's not. It's the right as a concept was developed for the purpose of having this normative this normative idea that certain people should have this ability to do something, not whether they actually do, because really rights are artificial construct. But anyways, that's just going off tangent here. The point of why children don't have right to vote is that children shouldn't have right to vote, right? But why shouldn't children have right to vote? It's that they simply are, quite honestly, incompetent. But however, given that they are competent, and that is why the test system makes sense, if they pass these exams and earn the quote-unquote right to vote, then there's no reason for that children should vote to be counted less than any adults.
Can I add something quickly, please? I think one of the biggest reasons why children aren't allowed to vote is because of possible influence from the parents. Because there's a lot.
Yes.
Because parents can influence their children a lot, and if someone has like 6 kids and the kids can all pass the test, but their parents are saying, "Oh, go vote for this candidate, or you're not getting any dinner tonight," then yeah, that's definitely going to be problematic.
Okay, so
but here's the thing, LSP.
I'll defend children voting here. So, and by the way,
I don't even need to be in here. Holy shit!
I mean,
let LSP talk.
Yes, people can influence.
Fuck up. Let's just go. Who gives a shit?
LSP, you go.
I mean, I don't give a shit. Fuck it. You guys go. This is already like
no. LSP, just go on. I just wanted to say, like, you compared this objection that based waifu made to give against giving women the right to vote because it will double the votes of their husbands and their fathers.
Yeah, the argument she's making is the exact same argument that people made against enfranchising women. That they'll vote as their husbands tell them to, or their fathers tell them to.
But if
you reject it for women, I think you should reject it for children.
No. Okay, hold on a second.
Yeah, I understand. I already know your argument. Your argument's going to be that, well, women have a degree of agency and autonomy superior to that of children over their parents, right?
Yes, they do, because they have developed. Because they're like adult women, their brains are.
I agree.
Developed.
Do employers have a degree of autonomy and control over their employees?
I mean, yeah. If it's a private business,
I mean,
yes.
Would you make this argument the other way for adults who are employed? Like, why not?
Frankly, I'm not willing to basically give children the right to have a say in decisions that affect me.
Can you just answer my question?
Yeah, back when I was in high school, I thought I was a communist.
Right.
We were all brilliant when we were 13.
Really quick, we're like for 20 seconds, okay? So the reason why the arguments that the parents can influence kids voting can also be applied to like
oh, the husband can also influence their wives for voting. They all conduct under the same logic, and all of that can be counter-argued by the fact that no agent can legally monitor who you're voting. You can't like, even if you're getting your kids to vote, you're influencing them, right? You can't possibly look at their ballots and then police them on who to vote. You can't do that. Like that's why
I have no idea who my blind
I was
girlfriend
just bringing
voted
that
for.
up because I thought it was an
And,
interesting.
Like, to this day, I still don't have the
that's
slightest
churches
idea.
too. Like,
This
whether it's churches can also regulate people to vote who they want to. Church.
I just want to go ahead and say real quick, and I think that is what McCarthy maybe was about to say. But okay, so LSP. So you want to give children the right to vote. Parents, yes, they do fundamentally influence their children, at least in younger in their younger years. So what is to stop? So you take a look at demographics right now. I'm not talking about demographics in the same way.
Yeah, just go.
Okay, so take a look at demographics. Which side of the aisle are having more kids?
Which
There's
side
an
of the aisle? Are you asking if conservative parents are having more children than
religious conservatives, on average, tend to have way more children than liberal parents? Like think of like evangelical. Like there's
I got this. So
there's an evangelical family who lives up the street from me. Very annoying. They have like 14 kids.
But we don't need to go into this. Yes, I agree. There are evangelical parents will have like more kids. What is the
no, that means then if they influence their children and told them who to vote for, because I mean, come on, kids, you can incentivize them. You say, hey, I will buy you this new video game if you go do this thing, and you end up voting for who I want. And it doesn't really matter to the kid, because they don't understand the complexities or the importance of voting itself, especially like at like 6. And more or less, you're just it's basically people who have the most kids have a larger say in the political system. So, if you think about it, it's basically like a family voting.
Okay.
If you think about it, everyone.
Like, do you want an evangelical?
Shut up! Jesus fuck. Okay. Sorry, you guys need to learn how to structure a fucking panel. No, I don't have an issue necessarily with families having more of a say-so in the democratic system. It seems like those would be the people who would have the biggest vested interest in the outcomes of that system. I don't have an issue with that necessarily. I don't want to enfranchise or disenfranchise people based on which side of the aisle they're on. I think that's fundamentally anti-liberal. This idea that you should only get to vote if you already agree with me defeats the entire purpose of voting. That children can be influenced is also a pretty much irrelevant argument to me, because there's no adult without influence either. There are varying degrees of influence based on lots of things: your socioeconomic background, even your personality, how impressionable you are as an adult. There are people, as Coronis is so keen to point out, there are people who are influenced by idiot like conspiracy theories on the internet, right? But, some things that even kids might be a little bit more have a little more scrutiny towards. This is just nothing irrelevant of an argument to me, because we wouldn't apply this standard to adults. Therefore, I shouldn't apply it to children. If you can't convince someone to vote your way,
LSP is that children are dependent. That's the common argument. However, that is flawed, because patients are also dependent, right? So if you believe on the logic that children shouldn't be allowed to vote because they're dependent, then patients shouldn't be allowed to vote because doctors can influence them or something, right? Or whatever group that can possibly influence you, or workers, or it can be employers or anything.
I mean, I understand that, but
an adult can possibly be an dependent all the time. Children's just one of them.
I mean,
we take this standard.
Like at least younger children have normally.
Nobody's going to disagree that children are impressionable.
They normally, younger children tend to think solely about the self. So it would be.
Dog, I think Republicans tend to think mostly about themselves.
No. I'm not talking about that. I'm like saying that it'd be in that case, it'd be easy if you just say, "Oh, kid, if you vote for this guy, I'll give you a chocolate bar," and the kid will be like more focused.
That's fundamentally different from if you vote for this guy, he'll give you a tax cut.
There's just so many different ways to take advantage of that, especially for populists to take advantage of.
Yeah,
populists already. Here's the red pill. Populists already do that. They do it on the right by promising tax cuts, and they do it on the left by promising health care. That's the candy bar for adults. That's the whole point of government. They're supposed to give you things, right? You're voting on people to give you things. The purpose of government is to redistribute wealth, right? In some manner or some fashion, either by cutting your taxes or by giving you some handout, whatever it may be, you're running on what people can do for you, right?
And that's
not fundamentally different in any way from promising a candy bar.
And that's
I mean, at least adults can think more.
Hold on.
Can actually have the ability of critical thinking. Children don't really develop critical thinking until around 12 years old.
Let the test develop that. Let the exam determine whether they are able to think. Not all.
Well, why an exam? How does an exam prove?
Age. It's
how does taking an exam demonstrate?
Like the reason why age matters, age isn't a means to an end. The only reason why age matters is to determine exactly what you're saying, which is the cognitive ability to think. And that is what the exams are supposed to determine.
Okay, so no, but how does a test determine that you are morally or ethically, I suppose, or that you, I guess, have the moral right to participate in the system and make decisions that...
What does a moral right mean?
This goes back to my point.
No. I'm just saying, the thing is, the problem with our society, let's just get rid of the word right entirely. Rights, okay, rights are good. I believe in rights. However, the thing is, our society has become so obsessed with rights. Like, oh yeah, I have a right to healthcare. Oh, I have a right not to wear a mask when I go basically everyone is so obsessed with having all of these rights. Nobody gives a shit about virtue anymore.
Okay,
literally goes back to what I said earlier as to rights or what morals or whatever. They're all normative concepts, not positive concepts. Again, and I know someone just mentioned that how I voted for John McCain over Obama in this mock 2008 just because he was white. Again, an exam would test you on that, and then if you don't, it would test that you're ignorant and won't give you the right to vote. That's that's the thing. Of course, most.
You basically advocate for my position, but there would be no age restriction.
First grade with George W. Bush.
And that's proposing.
Well, not because he's white, because I just liked his face.
Yeah,
when I was a little kid, can I give an anecdotal experience?
Please no, because it's worthless.
Fine, I was just going to give a funny story. It's because back in 2008, in school, we basically had a mock election, and we basically chose between McCain and Obama. And my parents influenced me to say, okay, McCain good, Obama bad, because Obama's a Democrat, McCain's a Republican. That's how easily influenced children are.
Exactly.
Yeah, I know that. That's exactly what the exams are going
easily influenced adults are.
If you are,
adults think in this same tribal mentality.
It's basic psychology. Children do not. The majority of children do not develop the ability to critically think until around age 12.
Neither do adults.
Okay.
Not
let me
political issues. There are. I'm sorry. Do you think the average voter? You can't have it both ways. You cannot have
lied by a candy. The exam will literally filter.
Hold on.
Okay. I understand if there was an exam.
Wait. Let LSP.
I'm sorry, LSP. Continue.
God, for fuck's sakes, we need to structure this properly.
I know. I'm meeting. I'm starting to just mute people now and have people go one at a time. LSP, go.
Okay, I mean, we can have this as a back and forth in a conversation, but you guys got to be. You can't monologue for one. Okay, I'm going to end my monologue right there. No, you can't do this simultaneously. I'm sorry, I don't know who said that. Base waifu. You can't speak on both sides of your mouth where you advocate for a system where voting rights are restricted, as Coronis would suggest, because even adults are too stupid, and simultaneously say, well, children lack the fundamental critical thinking that adults would have if they've developed it, or they haven't developed it, but adults have. It's speaking out of both sides of your mouth. This is not true. We know adult voters are stupid. We know adult voters do not critically think. Everything you're going to say about children voters, we know apply to adult voters. The only difference you can say between the two is the difference of age. Adult voters are gullible. Adult voters are stupid. Adult voters lack critical thinking.
Okay, now I should go. Okay, so I'm going to echo on what LSP said here. If you are at all you're mentioning is kids aren't able to think, that also applies to adults, and that's exactly the point. Again, age isn't a means to an end, right? The only reason why we aren't letting kids vote isn't because they're young. It's because they're unable to think, right? And that's the whole purpose of an exam, right? You're just making an example where, oh, I was a dumb person when I was a kid. Yeah, but you weren't allowed to vote not because you're a kid, but because you're a dumb. Okay, that is exactly why if you are able to be swayed and bribed by a candy bar, and also if you make this logic that I voted for John McCain because he's white type of critical thinking, you won't be able to pass these exams in the first place, right? That's why. So again, age is not a means to an end. You can't possibly make that argument because it's a dependent variable to what actually matters, which is cognitive ability.
I mean, yeah, I would agree if that was like, maybe if there was like a test system for like people who are underage to vote, I guess, yeah, that would make sense. I'm just talking about like what I have learned from taking like basic biology and psychology courses. It's basically just physical brain development.
Okay, then
basically going off of. I just wanted to take that into consideration. And also, a lot of people normally use the same argument about things like age of consent, which is a bit of touchy territory as well. I mean, I don't want to be. That might be a slippery slope, but I mean, this is I've just heard kind of similar kind of rhetoric used to argue for stuff like that.
Can I throw a bone?
One question. Should kids be allowed to skip grades and go to college? Yes or no? Yes or no?
I mean, if
it's allowed
in theory, I mean, not all kids are the same in terms of their
exactly
intellectual. Like, I mean, I was in like AP junior level classes when I was a freshman in high school. I mean, it all depends on like the individual.
So the answer is right. Yes, right. The kids, given that you're good enough, given that your academic standards are good enough, you should be allowed to go to college if you're a kid, if you're 12 years old. Yes, right? Is that a yes or no?
Yeah.
Theoretically, yes. However, I still don't know if I would let my kid do that.
Given that they have the credentials necessary. I don't know why those two aren't.
Why is everything about credentials with you? Why does everything have to be based upon some sort of because this is where I think, and I know you are a self-admitted
I wouldn't
elitist.
recommend it. I just think kids should just be allowed.
And I know, hold on. I know McCarthyist. I know you're a self-admitted elitist, and that's fine. But why? But I feel like your system would basically shut out people who, because intelligence isn't the end all be all of
intelligence.
I guess greatness or whatever. I don't know. I can't think of a better way to put that. But I mean, just because you're smart and because you perform well on like aptitude tests or just any kind of test in general and demonstrate knowledge, I don't think that knowledge or intellect is good enough of a measure to determine whether you are
so intelligence
fit to rule, I guess.
Very quickly, please. Let me
intelligence don't matter, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Because no.
Can I ask you something very quickly?
Your system's too exclusionary. Whereas my system, the idea of doing some kind of voluntary civil service, you can choose whether or not you could do it. If you don't want to do it, that's fine. But so like I know LSP was talking about this earlier about, for instance, he said his girlfriend is blind, so she would not be able to in certain areas perform as well as somebody who was not. Whereas in the system that I'm proposing, the civil service, voluntarily doing that, LSP's girlfriend, they would find her something to do. The thing is, that leaves it open for anybody. Like it is a more, like my system is inherently more inclusive as opposed to yours, which is specifically focused on the basis of somebody's intellectual aptitude. Because let's face it, some people are smarter than others. Some people are not particularly intelligent. But does that mean that they aren't? Does that mean that they have? Does that mean that they're not fit to have a say? No, not at all. I mean, you could have the smartest person ever who might be he might be devoid of any decent character whatsoever. Whereas you could have somebody with below average intelligence who is, number one, very resourceful, number two, loyal, or just have all of these typically noble traits, but they just aren't particularly intelligent in these specialized areas. I would say that person should have, they're more fit to participate or to have a right to participate in the decision-making process, as opposed to somebody just because they know shit.
Okay, can I please say something very quickly?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm actually going to throw both MMI and LSP a bone here. So clinical depression has been found to make the brain age faster. We know this for a fact, that someone with clinical depression, if they have it for a decade, will at least have I apologize, I'm distracted. Will have a brain that is 10 years older than someone without clinical depression. So some people are actually born with clinical depression. So let us say a 10-year-old was born with clinical depression, which technically means he has the brain of a 20-year-old. Do you think he could, if he studied hard, pass my exam?
Let me just make a quick note. So, Politicrat, you said intelligence shouldn't be it shouldn't be the only indicator, right? That's what you said. Yes, that is what you said. If that is the case, why are we banning kids from having the right to vote? If kids, given that they have all the service and resourcefulness, as you mentioned, why shouldn't they be able to vote? By your own logic. Because by your logic, intelligence shouldn't be the end-all be-all, right? And children don't have the cognitive ability to do that, so we ban them. But I thought you said it's not the end-all be-all. So shouldn't they be allowed to vote if they have the moral resourcefulness and virtue that you spoke of?
Are you speaking? Oh, you're speaking to me. I thought you were speaking to LSP for some reason.
Yes, I am.
Okay. Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
No, okay. So you said that intelligence shouldn't be the end-all be-all, and that it shouldn't be the only indicator whether you should have the right to vote. Yes, you said that.
Yes.
You did. Yeah. So if that is the case, then why should we ban kids from voting? Because the reason why we ban kids from voting is that they don't have that cognitive ability, right? The intelligence that you speak of, right? But by your own logic, given
we're
that
talking about fully developed, no, but you have to wait till they're fully developed, and then that sort of.
Why do we wait until they're fully developed? Why?
But wait. And I also mentioned an exception to the rule. Kids with clinical depression their brains develop faster. They're an exception to the rule.
I'm not talking about depression right now. I'm talking about
let's give Pess a chance. Actually, guys, let's give Pess a chance to talk. He hasn't had a chance to talk in a while.
No, I mean, you're not answering my question though. You said just now that intelligence shouldn't be the end-all be-all, right? But you banned children on the same level that they shouldn't be allowed to vote because they haven't developed, right? They haven't developed the cognitive ability. But I thought you said that it's not the end-all be-all. So that's a contradiction.
But that's not a matter of intelligence. That's more so a matter of sort of cognitive morphology, basically development of the brain.
Okay, so what if their brains are not developed when they're 30 years old?
Well, if their brains aren't developed when 30 years old, but you'll have other 30-year-olds whose brains their brain is no longer developing by 30 years old. That's what I mean. The human brain stops developing, at least within males, typically by the age of 25. And so, you have to wait till they all get to a certain age. You see where they all stand. And then by that point, based upon sort of their own ability, it's not difficult to understand. I mean, I think it's a false equivalency equating an 8-year-old who doesn't have a fully developed brain, but their brain is still in the process of developing, to compare them with somebody who's 30 years old who never developed beyond a certain point and who will not continue to develop. I mean, a 30-year-old who does not who is cognitively stunted is not the same as an 8-year-old who has not fully developed their cognitive ability.
Yeah, but the reason I cite the clinical depression thing is like if a kid is born with clinical depression, their brains are going to develop faster, so they're going to be more mature, like even when they're like 10 or 11, because of how the brain development is sped up unhealthily, mind you, by the disorder, if that makes sense. So that's why that is why for example, people with clinical depression when they're children or in their early teens tend to get in less trouble. I think statistically speaking, because they sort of have the brain of adults. I'm not making any sense, and I apologize. I was just giving an example based on my understanding of depression. There's always exceptions to the rule. There are definitely children who I feel have, you could argue, should have the right to vote because their brains have developed more. More to the point, LSP is also kind of right when he says, like, so LSP, your argument is that we shouldn't base voting rights off brain development because it's arbitrary. And like in the example I was giving, some people develop their brains faster than others, right?
Yes.
LSP is muted. I'm waiting for him to respond.
I didn't. Okay, apparently the host muted me. No, you've got my argument completely wrong. I think it was or is it Titan? I thought it was MNI, but okay. Somebody was arguing along the lines of what I was arguing earlier, right? The only reason you want brain development in children, or you would use this as a metric, is because it would ensure a degree of intelligence. And you only want the intelligence because you want good outcomes, right? So it seems like it's just a heuristic. Brain development doesn't really matter to me. It doesn't really matter to you either. You could have the world's like most underdeveloped 2-year-old brain, but it's somehow like a political like savant that could ace your test like it's nothing. That person should get the same rights to vote as any other person, right? Or as any adult.
Sure. Because
at least in this area, they've demonstrated a proficiency in what you care about. So brain development doesn't matter. It especially doesn't matter during those teenage years when people would be most interested in getting in politics, because from those teenage years to the time of full development, mostly what develops is impulse control. You're done developing.
All right, let's let Pest talk next.
I'm going to go to bed. You guys have fun.
Hey, can I want to offer one last criticism of your system though.
Yeah, go for
it. So you keep saying you've kept saying to just about everyone. Surprisingly, I'm the only one you haven't said this to, but you've told LSP, PES. I mean, not LSP. You told Coronis, you told PES, and you told MMI that their systems are inherently illiberal. However, and you say you stand for liberal democracy, which I have no reason to doubt that. Yet what seems kind of inconsistent is that you seem to be taking liberalism and giving it a backseat to democracy itself. Like, it seems to me like you care more about democracy than you do about liberalism itself. And we need to remember that liberal democracy is a combination of liberalism and democracy. It's a synthesis of the two. They are not synonymous. Not every democratic society is liberal, and not every liberal society has been. Yeah. I mean, most of them are today, but has been democratic. So what if there is, in this system of yours, you have, let's say, Nazis. Let's say Nazis use the democratic process. Let's say Richard Spencer comes back bigger and badder than ever, and he and his alt-right shitlords end up somehow getting a majority in Congress, and they end up imposing all these Nazi-ass laws and stuff, and basically, you said in the very beginning of the stream that you care about minority rights, but how does unrestrained democracy, and I'm not talking about direct democracy, where it's like 51% or 50.1% of the vote is what decides basically what makes the decision. But just in general, what about these illiberal groups that work within the democratic process to impose their illiberal ideas and illiberal policies?
Okay, if I
like that's
questions-
inherently contradictory, because if you believe in
not.
liberalism,
You're
you need to constrain democracy to make sure that it doesn't allow
you're just meandering again, right? Your question is in one sentence is, how do I contend with how do I reconcile a liberal democratic system with fascists? Is that your question?
Yes.
Okay, I don't. I think if you have to enforce liberalism violently at the end of a gun, you've kind of defeated the purpose of liberalism, right? Democracy must come first for liberalism. And while you can have you can have a democratic system that is illiberal, you cannot have a liberal system that is anti-democratic. It requires democracy. So while I do care about minority rights, I absolutely do. And I do care about human rights. I absolutely do. I'm very hawkish on protecting these things. I believe it is up to individuals to protect themselves. I believe it is up to groups to protect themselves, right, from these institutions that would otherwise infringe upon them, violate them, molest them. Absolutely, right? But I protect the legitimacy of any government to elect, or of any people to elect whatever government they so choose, even if that might be a government I disagree with because of its illiberal nature, right? I honestly think most Republicans are like a stone's throw away from fascism if you really pushed them. So I mean, I would just on that standard, but I would still respect the legitimacy of the government they run up until they start violating, their human rights violations become so gross and illiberal that it necessitates pushback. So it necessitates being called illegitimate and requires an overthrow.
Oh, and Eric, I just want to say real quick, Eric, I wasn't saying that they were getting a majority. That was just a hypothetical, because I was saying that what if they got a majority in an unrestrained democratic system, and they ended up basically doing away with civil liberties. So that's what I was saying.
I'm gonna bounce. You guys, thank you for having me on. You guys, peace out.
All right. See you. But I noticed a contradiction in what he said, though. He said liberalism shouldn't be enforced at the end of the gun, yet he said 2 seconds later that we should be protecting certain liberal values like free speech and whatnot. So isn't that a contradiction? Because he's basically saying we should be protecting rights at the end of the gun, but yet he says we shouldn't do that.
Yeah, exactly.
And I wish we had more time, because I was going to ask him, like, so can I even though he's not here, can I raise a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So in his video, Let Children Vote, Seriously, which I watched before this stream, he says 10 minutes, 14 seconds in, and he stops at 11 minutes, 4 seconds in. He mentions cases where we should be protecting children. He said we should be protecting them against predatory rapists, so-called unsafe working conditions, against gangs and criminals. But here's the thing. Once you grant all children from cradle to college, to quote him, permission to vote, politicians are going to appeal to that demographic, because politicians need to develop coalitions with the various factions of society in order to win elections. And talking from experience, minors, especially teenagers, want the rights of adults, even if that doesn't come with the responsibilities of adulthood. That means the age of consent, the age to drink booze, the age to drive, all these are vulnerable to being reduced or scrapped completely if you give children the right to vote. I wanted to know if he acknowledged that this situation could happen under a system. If he said no, then his system is incoherent and unrealistic, and he just doesn't want to acknowledge reality. If he said yes, that situation could happen, but we should still give children the right to vote, I don't know if I should admire that, or I don't know what we would go on from there.
No, 100%. 100%. I agree with you there. It just seems like it just should be common sense. It should, to anybody, I would think it would be common sense that LSP's system would fundamentally result in the erosion of the political system that made his model possible to begin with. You see what I mean? I know James.
Not to mention, like, a lot of I'm split between youths are rebellious, so their politics are informed by rebellion against their parents, and youths are naturally idealistic, so they lean towards what they consider like a higher ideal. I don't know. I'm divided between
That's
those
very
two
broad.
hypotheses for why teenagers act the way they do. It could be a mixture of both or somewhere in the middle, but to mine, the reason why people like Vosh are rising in popularity is because the majority of teenagers today are attracted to radical politics.
But the thing is, we need to also, like, from my experience, at least from friends I've had, people I've known in general, the whole teenage rebellion thing, yeah, that is a thing. However, I've actually never experienced that as being within the realm of politics so much, because I've noticed no. Okay, I'm just saying from my experience, the people I've known who grew up, for instance, in conservative families or liberal families and ended up changing or taking on the opposite position than what they had growing up. I've noticed that has happened in their 20s, not so much in their teens.
I have a counter though.
For instance, yeah, like you might have like this 16-year-old or this 15-year-old. For instance, when I was 15, I was like a communist for a week just because I thought I wasn't even really a communist. I'm just saying that tongue in cheek. I just thought the symbols were cool. I watched an episode of American Dad. It's a Seth MacFarlane show. I remember, where there was like a communist, and then like the kid was like wearing a communist hat or something. I was like, that's a cool hat.
Okay,
and
but
so
can I
I
give you a
literally
counter?
printed off communist iconography and put it on my fucking locker.
Okay, but I'm going to give you two counters to that. The Great Leap, not the Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution under Mao was primarily led by teenagers and young adults. The people who were killing their parents, burning libraries, destroying basically every fabric of thousands of years of culture in China. Those were done predominantly by teenagers and young adults. And another counter would be the Vietnam War. A lot of it was done by college students who were clearly indoctrinated. And funnily enough, and this is why I think when conservatives bitch and moan about professors being leftists, they're fear-mongering. Because listen, the majority of those college students you see protesting against the Vietnam War, 20 years later, they voted for Ronald Reagan. So, I don't really put too much stock in how leftist professors are indoctrinating children, because those people are going to grow out of it either way, based on the historical data. But a lot of the people who protested the Vietnam War were also teenagers who didn't want to see their parents or their older brothers going to war. So those are two counters to that. So teenage politics, like the influence of idealism on the youth, is a huge deal, and and the Cultural Revolution in Mao's China that essentially destroyed Chinese culture, and what was it bloody called? The Vietnam War protests are two examples of how idealism does negatively in many cases, but you can also argue positively in other cases. Because keep in mind, most of the founding fathers were very young, like they were like in their 20s and 30s. But yeah, those are just two counters. I think under his system, you would have a lot of like far left teenagers, or if they rebel against their progressive parents, far right teenagers voting away democracy. I think that's a huge concern.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly what James Burnham talked about in his book, The Suicide of the West, how democracy, or liberal democracy itself, is more or less paradoxical in nature, because in order to preserve that society, basically with democracy, to stay true to the principle of democracy, that means you'd have to let everybody, at least within reason. Ellis, not just, I'm not talking about kids specifically. I mean, let's just put it at a reasonable level, like 18, whatever. A principled democratic society would let anybody, regardless of who they are or their background, so long as they're a citizen, vote. Yet, what if you give voting rights to those who would more or less use democracy as a means of passing their anti-democratic agenda and eroding and doing away with the system? If you allow a principled democratic society to exist, that more or less leads to democracy's destruction from outside forces who would want to do away with it. So that's the suicidal aspect of democracy. However, on the other hand, if you restrict the rights of these other elements in society, if you block them out of the political system, if you make sure that they can't participate, then democracy is betraying its own principles.
So he's
it's a
sort of,
paradox.
I'm sorry, I hate to interrupt, but it feels like he's sort of echoing James Madison in the Federalist Papers number 10, because Madison basically argued that to a great extent in that paper.
Pardon me?
I don't know if you read the Federalist Papers, but yeah, you should read them if you haven't.
Oh, no, I've read the Federalist. Yeah.
And by the way, we should let Pest talk. Like, I want to hear Pest's thoughts on letting children.
I'm going to get going because
yeah, I know you have something. You have something to do. I know. Yeah.
Second of all, there's a couple of people that are making me feel rather because from what happened.
Do whatever you feel like you need.
I mean, it's not. It's just. I have a few other things I got to do, but maybe I can join maybe another time. But
sure.
Yeah. And I just want to one more thing before I go. Just
what do you have to say?
Coronis, I really appreciated a lot of the. Let me try this again. You made some good points. I just want to say I like the points you made.
Thank you.
And to the most of the chat, trashy. I'll see ya.
But yeah, let's get Pest in. Let's get Pest in here.
I'm sorry, but honestly, I really only wanted this stream to have 4 people, and then everyone started inviting themselves in, and I was too much of a pushover to say no. So, anyway.
Well, honestly, everyone is gone now, so like, I don't think.
I still want to hear your views, Pest, because actually,
honestly, I think a conversation would go better just between the 3 of us at this point.
Yeah, so I just want to hear your views, Pest, because I actually respect your opinions.
Well, I flirted with the idea of raising the voting age to 25, but I'm not willing to die on that hill. So basically, I'm gonna argue for just leave it at 18. If it ain't broken, don't fix it. Yeah, I don't really have much opinions on that.
All right, fair enough. But yeah, that was actually really fun.
But yeah, no, let's go. I think we can go a little longer. You good to go a little longer?
Sure. But what is there left to talk about?
I would say, I mean, we didn't really get to talk about the Starship Troopers, but like I'm actually in hindsight, I wish I did not go on that word salad.
It's all right. I mean, you're going to re-upload the stream. Technically, you're going to cut out some stuff that you don't want in there, so it's perfectly fine.
Sure, yeah, fair enough. But yeah. So either way, we never really got to touch on that aspect. The part about the part of me wants to say the service guarantees citizenship, but I mean that's kind of contrived. Honestly,
I'm sympathetic towards your system because
it's
partially inspired by the Roman Republic, because even though in the Roman Republic you sort of needed to own a certain values. I'm sorry, you needed to own a certain amount of property in order to vote. One way to earn that property prerequisite to voting was military service. In fact, 25 years of military service. So the majority of senators, these were not cowards. Like, these people could hurt you if you got in your way. Most of the senators were veterans, which is very neat in my opinion, and very admirable as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and originally when they set it up, we need to remember also that for better or worse, and I think that, so I personally don't believe that in order to vote, you should have to be a property owner. I think that that's too extreme for me. However, the United States was founded not as a democratic republic, but was founded as an aristocratic republic with democratic institutions. The whole point of democracy as a system of government, capital D, is arguably the worst system of government. However, you can take aspects of that system, the procedural aspects, and place it inside the framework of another system, aka liberalism, and make it so that a liberal republic is legitimized by those democratic institutions, lowercase d. And they more or less are intended as a means for the people to keep the leaders accountable. And that's the whole point. That's the whole point of like having different branches of government. And that all goes back to, it predates Locke even. You see that even in Thomas Aquinas. You see that in Aristotle when he proposes his idea of the polity, which is a mix of democracy, monarchy, and aristocracy. Very similar to what would eventually become the idea of three branches of government in modern liberal political theory. But yeah.
Fair enough. But one of your friends, by the way, I sort of slid in a reference to your stream with English Knight.
Hold on. Just want to say, Kevin, I will bring you on for another stream in the future. It's just that this panel had already been decided. Well, 4 of them at least had been decided about a week ago, and I'm trying to plan things out now. But just send me a message on Twitter, and I'll be more than happy to have you on whenever.
I mean, it's your right to platform whoever you want. If you want to interview Kevin, that's perfectly fine by me. I do want to say, though, about English Knight. One of your friends, I sort of slid in a reference to your stream with him the other day when I asked what were the moral tariffs, because you mentioned a card you found in your drawer randomly. But English Knight, a friend of yours, said military service should be like a prerequisite to voting, but an alternative to that would be community service and charity. But my problem with this is fighting enemy combatants with guns and bombs is in no way comparable. And in fact, it can be traumatic. But I mean, sure, charity and community service is admirable since you're taking care of others without compensation. But if you're going to make an alternative to military service, you should ensure it takes much longer. That's just my opinion. I think military service, if we're going to go with your system, I think military service should be the only option if you are mentally and bodily capable. However, if you are not, then there would be civilian alternatives for you. But it would be like the Israeli system where if you are able-bodied, you would have to do military service, but still be voluntary. It would just be a means to earning suffrage. If we went with your system, that's what I would implement. Personally.
Fair, yeah, I mean, that's fair. Either way, though, I've never been a fan of the idea. Like, I think you see that, yeah, like you have in Israel. I do not like the precedence of, okay, everybody has to do service. Everybody who's a citizen is forced to do service before they can go and like you have to join the military. No, because the whole point of this is that it would be voluntary. If you want to participate in the system, you can. And if you don't want to, you can't. The thing is, it's just, you just vote. I mean, you literally have every single other constitutionally protected right there is, but yeah.
Fair enough, I guess. But no, I mean, like the reason though I mentioned Israel is, again, I don't support compulsory conscription, although you can maybe make some decent arguments for it, like John Delaney did. But the thing is that, what was it called? God damn it, I forgot what I was going to say. The thing is, like, for example, they require women to serve in the military to fight in combat if they meet the same qualifications as men. Still, only 20% of the Israeli military are women. So there are still a chunk of the population that can't do military service. But I still think, like, for those who are, if we went with your system, it would still be if you are able-bodied, then you go through the military. But if you aren't, then you go through a civilian alternative that you can choose. I don't know. That's just my opinion.
Okay, fair enough. What would you have to say about this, Pest?
It's not something I've really thought about, the military service system, because it's never been implemented before, and because of that, I don't think I can have a proper opinion. Though I would see it as something that is to be taken into consideration when designing a political system. As far as this panel, I think, well, I'm kind of falling asleep now. I didn't realize that we were going to be stuck on the point about test. So, yeah, I don't think I can defend my system from now on. So,
well, do you want to just at least give it kind of like a summary?
okay, I'll give it a summary. Well, my proposal for improving liberal democracy was to have politicians meet certain requirements to get into office. That was one proposal, but I personally, I've decided to just defend the fourth position, which is just ban all political parties.
Not the third position.
No. Just ban all political parties and just have everyone run as an independent. Under that system, coalitions will probably form. There will be factionalism. Factionalism is inevitable, but eventually, when an election cycle comes, factions will form and then dissolve because there's nothing rigid holding it together. So that's why my proposal tonight is to make democracy nonpartisan, so everyone votes independent candidates.
Okay. Either way,
I don't know how much to add anymore. I'm kind of done.
Yeah. Honestly, at this point, I think honestly, I still think the first part of the stream went better. Like, we had too many people on. Like, honestly,
I kind of wish we stuck with me, you, LSP, and Pass.
Yeah, it should have just been, yeah, that would have been much better. So that is I'm actually gonna be a lot stricter in the future for limiting guests on my stream. Like, I mean, it was chaos towards the middle, and yeah. Either way, I know there are some people in the chat who came in to watch this seriously, and then there's a lot of other people who just came in for shits and giggles. Either way, thank you everybody for coming and watching for whatever the reason was that you came and watch. I still do appreciate it. But either way, if you want, just be sure to like, subscribe, all that stuff. I understand Kevin Castley is in the chat. I just wanted to let him know also, I was actually going to send you a message in a couple of days, but Outreamer wants to continue that dialogue. So you and I can touch up on that. But
I'd be happy to watch it, actually.
Yeah, no, either way, we need to continue with that at some point. But either way, thank you guys for coming on. This was a little messier than I would have liked, but it's really not a big deal.
Now you just need to re-upload the stream and cut out that that 20-minute ramble.
Yeah, no, that was the part that ruined it. Either way, yeah, thank you guys for coming on. Anybody have any closing statements? I forgot to ask that. Or
I don't.
All right, everybody. Again, thank you for tuning in, and good